Welcome to Wowhead's 11.2 reveal. Blizzard has given us some access to 11.2 information, and we're here to talk about it and show it off with the help of my good friends Dratnos and Tettles. Stay tuned for all the information and even some details from Wowhead's exclusive interview later on. But you're here for information, so let's just jump right into it. I think one of the things that many people want to know is the Season 3 dungeon rotation. And the first one is a brand new dungeon coming in patch 11.2, Eco Dome Eldani. This 3-boss dungeon takes place after the raid in the story and has players fighting the Devourers and Wastelanders. But in addition, we have 3 more dungeons, and they are Tazavesh Streets, Tazavesh Gambit,
really?
Let's go.
and Halls of Atonement. It's Shadowlands. Shadowlands is coming back, guys. What do you guys think of this?
These were 3 of my top maybe 4 Shadowlands dungeons, so I'm excited.
I think that like whenever most people rank some of their top 5, top 10 dungeons of all time, multiple, if not all 3 of those are actually part of the top 10. And I think it's also kind of interesting the fact that we got Operation Floodgate as a brand new dungeon this season in Season 2, and in next season we're getting another new dungeon that we have yet to explore. Are we getting 4 of the returning dungeons that we voted on? Do we know anything about that?
Yes, so the other dungeons are indeed the 4 returning dungeons that players have voted on: Arakara, Dawnbreaker, Priory of the Sacred Flame, and Operation Floodgate.
Interesting. Those all have pretty good trinkets in them. What a coincidence.
Do you know what those 4 dungeons lack, by the way? Necks.
How do you guys think that the new dungeons are like Streets and Gambit are gonna be affected by the stop change? I think that's kind of something that's interesting because in Gambit, I remember the fish sticks being an integral part of how you'd play that dungeon. You'd have to stop the fish sticks. Like, what's kind of read on that, Dratnos?
Yeah, that's definitely going to be, it's going to play kind of different, that first area. I always remember that was the hard part of Gambit, right? Was you had to get through the first few Murloc pulls, and then it was kind of smooth sailing from there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we also have the Pirate Dragon fight, which many people struggled to do correctly, I think.
Yeah, that one definitely, that's like a tank check, right? Like there's a lot of tank movement and positioning challenges, so it's rare for a dungeon boss to be like that, but I think it'll be fun. I think if you missed out on Shadowlands, you are going to be having a really good time actually playing Tazavesh. That dungeon is an all-timer, just a really great like story theme, a lot of cool mechanics, so it should be I think it's a really good choice to bring back, and obviously it makes sense with the theme of the patch.
Yeah, I think that in addition to that as well, like I think it's just mob density and just design of all 3 of those dungeons. It feels really good whenever you're fighting trash in all 3 of those places. You'll do 15, 20 mob pulls fairly consistently in Halls of Atonement and Gambit. Streets has a couple of points as well where you'll do 15 or 20 mob pulls, and I think it's just very satisfying for players.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things I think, these dungeons are also pretty short. Like Eco Dome Eldani, unless there's a lot of trash, three bosses. Halls of Atonement and both the Tazaveshes, I believe, are pretty short, alongside the Dragonflight ones, which we just did as well. So, or excuse me, the War Within.
Gambit was pretty quick. Yeah, and then Streets was a bit longer, right? Streets is 5 bosses, right? Yeah, because you'd go in and you'd do the security guard.
Yep.
And then there was the menagerie. There was the music boss. And then I guess there was just the last boss. So I guess there was just 4 bosses.
Yeah,
okay.
I think it was 34 minutes though, or 33 minutes. One of the 2 of those.
Yeah, a little bit longer than Gambit, and it does have that like RP section in the middle where you had to go and solve the market password thing.
It had the mail room.
Yeah, that's the mailroom boss. Okay, so
that
it was
the
5
boss.
boss.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah, okay.
Where you hoped you killed it before it killed you. I remember that one very very
yeah,
well.
that it had the big soak, right? That you needed to all stack in. That was funny. That was a good one.
But yeah, I mean, overall, like, my impression of this, it's a great pool. There's no dungeon like Theater of Pain that I think is a massive groaner right off the bat. How do you guys feel about the overall 8?
I'm pretty excited. So what do we know about the new dungeon that's coming in, the Ecodome? You said 3 bosses, and it's after the story of the patch or of the raid. What else, like, do we know anything else about that, or is that the sum of our information about the Ecodome right now?
Well, all we really know is there's players fighting Devourers and Wastelanders. That's pretty much about it. So
Devourers are some of my favorite mobs.
Yeah,
they don't do anything.
That could be good, but that could be all about to change.
I think that in general we have I mean, we've seen in the War Within, dungeons are across the board getting a little bit shorter. We're getting closer to 30 minutes in pretty much every single dungeon. And I think that that has been pretty positive for most of the player experience. And I think that these are all-timer dungeons. I think that this season could be an absolute banger.
Alrighty. Well, one of the things that Blizzard announced in this presentation is a big quality of life change. I know some of you have been talking about this for a while. And that is Blizzard is changing their philosophy on dungeon checkpoints.
Ooh.
They're adding a new checkpoint system called Waystones. And that is kind of one of the main things that they are doing. They're going to be icons on the map. And here's what Drew D'Souza said. We're going to revisit our philosophy there and how long a run back is and when dungeon checkpoints unlock. And we want to visualize some of that in-game through what we're calling Waystones. As you unlock checkpoints, you'll have an icon on your map. And you'll have these stones that warp in and show you this is where I'm coming back if I release.
That makes so much sense to me. Yeah, this reminds me a little bit of Delves, where you reach the meeting stone checkpoint, and it shows you in the delve, and like you get a little thing that's like, hey, you made it to the checkpoint. And I think that as soon as I saw that in Delves, I was like, something like this would be huge for M+.
It got added to Mythic Plus this season where it would just say it in your party chat.
Yeah, it says it in chat, but it's so much better to have like it's easy to miss a chat message, let me tell you, especially if I'm already ignoring my healer there.
Yeah, so I think as well, like him saying that they're looking at the philosophy on how dungeon checkpoints work is pretty solid, because we've seen complaints from a myriad of players basically since the dawn of time that is like, our run back is just way too long. Just straight up, our run back is too long. It creates this weird situation where to be able to get back to my group, it's going to take me 2.5 minutes to be able to make it back. I'm better, laying dead on the ground or getting meld res potentially, and it kind of creates this weird imbalance. And I think if they're revisiting checkpoints and making them better and more player friendly, I think that's a positive. Yeah,
there's like two issues, right? One is just the average run back there were a lot of nasty run backs that's gotten better since, I would say, Dragonflight. For me, the pre-nerf Halls of Infusion run back was the worst offender of this, right?
Oh, God.
Back in early Dragonflight, where it's like, oh yeah, I'm signing up for a 5-minute run back. That's gotten a little bit better, but the other part is like the opacity of knowing where you're going to release, because like you said, sometimes you have this decision to make of should I release or should I not, and making the wrong decision is a pretty big mistake.
Yeah.
But learning which bosses update your graveyards and which ones don't is not a particularly I don't think that's a particularly good skill to test of all the skills that Mythic Plus tests you, because Mythic Plus it's great, but like I think that making that something that's just like, yeah, you see it on the map, you'll see it when you get to it. Hopefully there are 5 scattered throughout each dungeon, so you're always within a minute of it. That's the hope. I don't know if that's how it's actually going to be implemented.
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting because Dawnbreaker is a little bit different than Arakara, with how like Dawnbreaker and Arakara have like really weird checkpoints as well for run back, because Dawnbreaker you're just like flying around, so you just drag and right.
Yeah, and then you get the bat in Arakara, and you always release at the start.
Yeah.
What were you gonna say, Squishy?
What were you gonna say, Squishy?
So we saw a little bit of a video of it. Basically, this giant like Hearthstone like thing just kind of warps in, and you can see it. It's massive. It's like impossible to miss when it activates. And then on your minimap, it'll have a little icon on bosses that activate the Waystone as well. So you know that when you kill this boss, the Waystone will activate. So it kind of gives you a heads up, and also post-mortem, you're like, this is where it is. I can't miss this anymore type thing.
Yeah, being able to pop open your map after you die and see where you would release is going to be really big for people that don't just have it memorized which bosses update your graveyard and which don't.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we've talked a little bit about the dungeons, so let's now talk about the raid in patch 11.2, and that is Manaforge Omega. It is an 8-boss raid located in Koresh, with the final boss being the Void Lord Dimensius. This boss fight was described as being a feast for the eyes, and is the biggest boss they've ever made, which is about the size of Stormwind.
What? The boss itself is the size of Stormwind?
Yeah, the boss fight takes place over the size of Stormwind, apparently.
Yeah, it's a horrific vision, so we're running it back.
So the last time we had something similar to this was what, like Carapace and N'Zoth, maybe?
Yeah, that was a pretty large fight. I guess there have been some fights that have gone over pretty large distances. Tindril, right? Like, if you actually mapped the size of the Tindril room, that's probably Stormwind-sized. Because you're dragon riding for a really long time, so...
Any kind of movement-based, I think, like, Blackwater Behemoth is probably pretty big, too, with the swimming.
Yeah. So I suspect that this fight will include some form of movement, then, to traverse such a large arena, unless it's just purely visual, and we're fighting in, a small section of it while we see the rest of it.
What do you guys think about 8-boss raid as the last raid of an expansion potentially?
I've always been a fan of going up to 9 or 10 bosses, but 8's fine too. Yeah, it's it seems like that's sort of the new normal raid size is 8.
I think it gives some kind of consistency. I wish it was maybe a little more, but we'll have to see.
Yeah.
Like, I would value the quality here over the quantity, right?
Certainly.
I think that we're all kind of in the same boat where it's like, I really wish I could have 10 banger bosses, but if they're going to give us 8 banger bosses,
Yeah,
really
exactly.
complain.
I think it's also probably nice for the Great Vault to just have it be a consistent number, so that it's like you don't have to relearn each patch. Like, okay, there's an extra boss, which means this breakpoint has changed for my weekly vaults.
That's pretty fair, I think. But yeah, they described a couple bosses. There is a warden protecting the entrance pipes. There is an army of ethereals still being wrapped. A moth-like creature from which ethereals attract silk for their wrappings. A mysterious council of demon hunters. And then the cosmic battle with Dimensius. So they kind of described 5 of the 8 bosses there. And some of those sound pretty cool. So I'm excited for this. Alrighty
Yeah, me
then.
too. I mean,
I love raids. I think that something that was interesting about this patch is that we didn't have a council fight, and so we're actually getting another council fight again, it sounds like.
yeah, council fights have been interesting because depending on where they are in the raid, sometimes they're like overwhelming mechanically, or they're one of these bosses where it's like it has 30 mechanics, but only 0 or 1 of them actually matter if it's too early in the raid. So that's definitely a spot where I'm very curious to see if they've been iterating on how they design those, and also how deep in the raid it is.
It also depends the type of council fight, because we had the Council of Dreams, the unmovable
Yes.
Council of Dreams, which was...
And the ducks as well was a pretty frustrating mechanic on that fight. Although it was weird because it was obviously like an extremely whimsical and fun mechanic, but also if you were progressing that boss, it was very annoying to constantly get ducked.
2 people were just ducks that fight, and that was it.
Yeah. The Council of Demon Hunters is interesting though. That's that should be pretty easy to beat. Those guys are not particularly smart.
I hope they fell rush all over the place. That'd be really fun.
Dude, imagine if it's just on a platform, they just rush off the edge, and if they're off the edge, they die. It's like Dark Souls.
I would appreciate if they make Melee have really bad uptime on that fight. Just keep fella rushing them.
Just give it one of those mechanics of from the the boss in Blackwing Descent or Shriekwing, where it can't see you because it's blind, and
Oh my God.
it's trying to like sonar locate you.
Could be cool. All right, let's move on with the raid to something that is awesome here. So Season 3 tier sets. They kind of revealed a little bit about them here, and these have a big twist. So each hero talent will have a tier set bonus, rather than each spec, meaning each spec has 2 tier sets to choose between. So
right, there's still the same total number of tier sets. It's just each bonus is now applied to 2 specs.
Exactly.
Based on which hero talent you're using.
Exactly. So if you're a
How does that
Devastation
work for
Evoker,
hybrids.
So that seems like the big question mark here is like, the Colossus hero talent tree has to apply to a tank and a DPS spec.
yeah,
Historically, tank set bonuses have been defensively themed, right? Because you're a tank, and healer set bonuses as well, right? Like,
Yep.
how do you design a set bonus that's good for the healer / DPS hybrid ones, the healer / tank hybrid ones as well? All of that's going to be, I think, really interesting. But it does mean that this is now like a tuning knob as well. That means that if there's been a spec hero talent combination that hasn't been getting played, they can give it a good set bonus.
it's really interesting to me that they're doing this, because tier sets were very fire and forget. I mean, they still kind of are, but you might play one spec before the tuning on, before you're getting your tier set, and then you might swap the second the tier set appears, and
Very
now it's
likely.
just like the tier set is almost just like part of the class, and you're gonna have 4 separate tunings to deal with, which the theory crafters are gonna have a fun time with, I think.
So theory crafting aside and the potential pitfalls aside, I actually think it's cooler what they're looking to do with the tier set bonuses, attaching them to hero talents, than what they were in this patch, where they were, this gambler themed, that all range DPS got the jackpot, all melee DPS got the winning streak. I actually think that what they're going for with this seems like it's a lot more logical, and tying it in to those hero talents, I hope is quite nice, because one of the things that I really like about tier set bonuses just generally is that it changes up my rotation, or it makes my rotation feel a little bit different, and the ways that it interacts with my kit. I really like those parts of tier sets, and I hope that whenever they are actively a part of the hero talent tree, that it does end up changing my rotation or making the hero talents just feel tangibly different in that way.
There's definitely a lot going on.
I'm definitely I agree. Like I like trying new stuff. I like seeing them trying new stuff. So even if this doesn't end up working out, like if it ends up being true that there's a lot of unbalance between them, even if it doesn't actually make the gameplay that much better, I'm basically always going to be excited about them trying something new like this. And then they can just not do it again if it doesn't work.
Yeah, I'm like already kind of skeptical because like I look at like the Druid one where it's Keeper of the Grove and it's like restoration and balance, and I'm just like, what is the tier sets like overlap supposed to be? It's already, that hero talent already kind of feels forced to overlap. It's not something that either specialization is particularly happy about. And then if what is the tier set going to do that both specializations are going to be happy about? But it's just like a level of skepticism that's unless you actually see what the tier set bonuses are, you can't really tell.
And if the end result is that this season you pretty much always just play one of your hero talents because it's got the better set bonus for your spec, that's not actually that bad, because a lot of specs are already kind of like that, right? And this might just mean it's a different hero talent than what you currently play.
I mean, you made a video a couple weeks back.
Yeah.
Most specs are playing like one hero talent for one style of content, and they might play a different hero talent for Mythic Plus if they're not playing the same one. But a lot of them are playing the exact same hero talent for basically every single piece of content.
Right, exactly. Like that's kind of the default. Obviously, there are a few specs that have like really great options. You have Evokers that can play Scale Commander or Flame Shaper, and it would, I guess, be a shame if there's a hero talent that's just or a set bonus that's way better for one than the other, and that takes that away. But it could just as easily take a spec that currently only plays one hero talent and give it a competitive second option, right? So I think the balance concerns are one thing, and even if there are balancing issues, it'll only be for a season. So yeah, I'm optimistic that this is going to be fun, even if it's not necessarily balanced. But I don't think that would be a problem if it wasn't.
I think I'm less concerned about the balance. Like they can constantly hotfix tune stuff. Whenever I said skeptical, I'm only looking at it from like a design perspective and making sure that it's cohesive and fun feeling.
Yeah. I guess a problem that I have with a lot of the hero talent trees is that a lot of them kind of just give you one big button and then put all their power into it, and there's a good chance that the set bonus is going to further do that, right? Like, when you press Demolish, it's going to do even more damage on a Colossus Warrior, for instance, and like, I kind of wish it would move a little bit in the other direction of where the power is budgeted in these specs, so that could be a downside of this. But again, I am just excited to see them trying stuff.
Absolutely. It's a pretty big change from the norm where you get an option of a tier set now in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah, the fact that you'll have two to choose from is a very cool thing on each of your specs.
Did they mention if it's 2 and 4 sets that are changing with the hero talent, or is it just 2 sets?
Not specifically, just that each hero talent will have a different one. So
I'd be shocked if you didn't get different on both, though, because
I agree.
Well, I mean, the jackpot was only on 2 set, right? Like Winning Streak was only on 2 set. But this one,
but like,
100% sure.
True, but it would be very weird to design a set bonus that doesn't like do 2Ps and 4Ps, right?
Yeah. I'm with you.
But yeah, I mean, I'm excited to see them as well. Surely we'll be seeing them soon, because PTR should probably be firing up kind of soon, huh?
Probably. But with this, so we have the tier sets. You're going to have 5 slots that are tier sets, but Blizzard is adding something else, a slot that may not be replaced, because in patch 11.2, you are going to get a brand new artifact cloak. So players will seek the aid of a powerful figure and gather ethereal relics in order to make the Reshi wraps, your artifact cloak. You may hear artifact and get a little scared, but in our interview with Blizzard, we asked about the Reshi wraps and how they will be upgraded, and got a response. So Taylor Sanders, senior encounter designer, mentioned that we want Reshi wraps to be warbound as well, so players progressing on one character will be able to share that progress with others. You will upgrade them week by week. There is a currency that you'll be able to obtain, and that's obtained through a variety of different ways if you're engaging with the game. Mythic Plus, Raid, Delves among them. There will be a catch-up for players who miss a week.
Do we know what it does?
A little bit. So there's a lot going on there. With the Artifact Cloak, you're basically going to be able to participate in a new activity called phase diving. You're able to use the Reshi Wraps to basically see the world through the eyes of the Ethereals and like see hidden things in the open world, in delves, dungeons, and even raids.
Ooh.
So
Raids, like old raids as well?
no, just
Or just
raid.
in the new raid?
The raid, the new raid. I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
Players will basically to enter the raid. You have to trick the mana filtration system to enter Mana Forge Omega using the Reshi Wraps.
So these are you basically are passing yourself off as an ethereal because you're wearing their bindings,
or their energy or something like that.
That's cool.
So it seems kind of
oh yeah,
really cool.
You took it from the ethereal dry cleaner and it still got like the ethereal smell on it.
But it delves so that you're able to use the Reshi Wraps to unlock new gateways leading to boss rushes or challenge rooms. And there's a new social feature where you'll be able to see your friends' presence, such as leaving you messages, seeing their ghosts running around, and where they died.
Dude, it's like the Mario Kart ghost feature.
It's like Elden Ring.
I was thinking Elden Ring.
Yeah,
Turn back. Nothing here.
Mist or Beast.
But yeah, this is just...
I mean, this kind of feels very reminiscent of the horrific visions and that cloak all the way back from, what was that? What patch was that? Like 9.3 or whatever? That's kind of how I feel about it, in conjunction with the artifact necklace that we got from that season, depending on what the cloak actually ends up doing. I feel like, is there like secondary procs on it, or or is it just a cloak?
As of right now, that's all we basically know about it.
Okay.
But it seems very integral to the patch.
What do you
I
think
like
about
that they're doing Warbound stuff with it. Yeah, that seems nice, because oftentimes with these sorts of things, if you started a character like a month in, it would be another thing that you'd be thinking about, like, do I actually want to start another character? I'd have to do all this again. And now instead it's like, oh, if I start a new character, I will have this boosting me already on that character. Right? It's going to be easier rather than harder. So I think that's a really good choice with making this legendary. And then, I mean, Cloak it's a timeless slot, right? When you think about what slots to put legendaries into, weapons are kind of there's too many of them, too different. You have to do a whole expansion if you want to do those. Armor pieces, everybody's got different armor pieces, so you'd have to do different, stuff with that. Then we've got rings, trinkets, and cloaks, and trinkets already do kind of cool stuff, so I guess necklaces as well. But that's why we see those as the legendaries or the artifacts so often. And I think this is going to be our third artifact or legendary cloak, right? We had the Mop one and the N'Zoth one, so
yes.
Yeah, seems exciting, seems fun.
It's weird that they called it artifact rather than legendary. I'm not sure the intent there, but because when I think of artifact, I think of the artifact grinding from BFA personally, but this seems a little different.
I think of the necklace immediately whenever they say artifact. And those are kind of the powers and things that I attribute to artifacts, right?
Yeah. I mean, maybe it has a story connection or something like that. Like, we'll have to see what this does, but it seems very integral to the story of the patch, so I'm excited to see what they do with this. All right. Let's get into some other hype news now. So, when patch 11.1 released, do you remember how there was an awkward dead week where you couldn't upgrade your Season 1 gear, and the new endgame content wasn't out, so it felt like there was nothing to do?
Dude, I got a myth track trinket out of my vault that week, and then I couldn't upgrade it because it was upgrades were turned off. Yeah.
Yes. So in 11.2, the dead week is going to be dead, I believe. The week 11.2 non-bountiful delves and baseline baseline Mythic Season 3 dungeons and world bosses will be available and tuned for Season 3 difficulty and drop Season 3 gear.
Nice.
That's champion track.
That is champion cap. So Season 3 champion gear will be available the first week of patch 11.2, meaning all players have something to do before Season 3 launches.
I think that this is the correct approach for this. I mean, I remember whenever the dead week happened, there was a lot of people who came back to the game, right? They took a little bit of a break in between the seasons. They came back. Maybe their gear wasn't like completely top notch. Maybe they missed the turbo boost from this season or something like that, and they want to come back and actually be able to get gear. And then they're just not able to upgrade any of their gear. That felt like that was just like, it felt like it was so disconnected. And I think that Delves and M0s, while there is some player power that's attached to doing those things, it's not going to make you so much tangibly stronger. And it's, like Dratnos said, it's on champion track as well. And it starts out the new season, I think, on the right foot.
Yeah, there's a balance they need to strike between too much to do and too little to do in the first weeks, right? Because you don't want people to feel rushed through the story content, right? And you don't want people to feel like they have to be doing a bunch of stuff to avoid falling behind on their character. But I think that it definitely swung too far in the direction of you finish everything in a couple hours, and then you're just sitting there driving around Undermine, waiting for the next week to come around. This time around, instead, like, if you're a high-end player, you can start farming up champion track across your characters, and that's a use of your time that at least feels pretty good. Champion track gear is really strong.
Yeah.
And then if you're a low-end player, at least now there's delves that are relevant to start pushing, and there's a world boss to go kill that is going to give you good loot as well. So, but you're also still not feeling like the week has come out. There's story content that you want to do, and instead there's an infinite amount of M+ that you should do, because that's not actually true here, right? There's still a limit on how much stuff you actually can do, because it's all on a weekly lockout, right? All the things that are opening up.
But I also think it helps people get into M+ the next week when you kind of know the dungeons already. For all of us here, we've played Halls of Atonement, we've played Tazavesh. We know what those dungeons are roughly going to be about. But for someone that didn't play since Shadowlands, joined back during Dragonflight, this will be their first opportunity to kind of get used to the dungeon before things happen.
M0's on daily lockout, right?
Weekly now.
They were daily lockout for the first few days of the expansion, and then they moved them to a weekly lockout when the season 1 started, and I think they have been ever since.
Okay.
So, and I think that would be good for this, because, again, I think that we can move a little bit more towards there being more stuff to do, but I still think you don't want to have it be too high pressure of a week.
I think it should be for, like, catch up and, like, getting yourself integrated into the season, not necessarily be, like, this massive blitz for player power.
I mean, Champion Track gear is really good. That's Champion Track gear is pretty much the same as Hero Track gear, and for a lot of high-end players for those first few weeks, because you don't want to use your Gilded Crests on it anyways, unless they're changing around the tracks at all. So being able to get a bunch of that onto your characters is a quite strong way to start the season. Do we know what item level Champion Track's going to be yet as well? Is there any news about whether the Turbo Boost is being incorporated into that eye level jump or not?
I have no idea, but by the way that it was this season, Champion 4 out of 8, which is just the end of the carb track, is 636. And Mythic and Surek Narrowbar Palace was 629. So Champion 4 of 8 should be an upgrade or equivalent at the worst case to other pieces of gear that you have. So I think it'll go over great.
The max turbo boost, that is?
Yeah, it'll probably... I mean, Champion should end up ending around the 700-ish level, so that's a very strong start to the season. Even though you won't be able to upgrade it just yet, if you get a good statted piece, for instance, you can then upgrade it later when you get a nice high Hero Track piece in the same slot, and you're chilling. Yeah, so it's going to be a good week. I mean, it definitely is going to be some good stuff. Like, you're going to want to do those M0s if you're a heroic or mythic raider or something like that. That is going to be a good use of your time. But I'm actually pretty happy about that, because it did just always feel weird that there was a week where the new WoW patch was out, and it was sort of the least important week to log in if you were a WoW player for the next few months.
Dude, I think you and I talked about this at the Race World first. I was like, how many other games launch their main content? And then they're like, yep, well, there's nothing to do now.
And it's still going to be true that this is less important to play than the future weeks. And if you're taking time off work to try and make your character strong for raid or something like that, it's still not the right week to choose, right? You still want to choose the next week, but it's at least a little bit more, I think, closer to the healthy amount of stuff to do.
This is also just kind of a more fun thing to do rather than farming dirt. Or
exactly.
Wax. People are always going to look for stuff. Yeah.
And I'm sure you can still do those things as well. Or again, there's a cap on how much of your time gets taken up by these Champion Track farming activities, probably a couple hours per character.
Absolutely. All right, Tettles, trivia question. If you remember, you have some unfinished business with the boss from this expansion. Do you remember who?
Roshanon.
No, he's dead.
What? Well, okay, we had unfinished business from Roshanon and the Dawnbreaker, but then we finished it in Narrowbar Palace.
Yes.
All right.
So partial credit.
The Darkness.
Also partial credit. That boss doesn't die at the end of the fight.
Dratnos, you have one come to mind?
I think the answer we're looking for is Nexus Princess Kaiveza, because she hearts out.
Yeah, it is Nexus Princess Kaiveza, and she is the new Delve nemesis for Season 3.
Whoa!
Oh!
So, everyone's, I think, maybe favorite or top 3 of Narrowbar Palace is coming back, and you'll be fighting a 1v1 versus Nexus Princess Kaiveza, and, quote, she's got a whole bag of new tricks.
Ooh, that sounds fun. I hope that for all delves this season, if you ever drop below 10% health, she just teleports in and kills you. I think that's a that'd be a really fun delve mechanic to add in.
I loved that fight, and I cannot wait to see what they can do in like a one-on-one versus Nexus Princess. So I can't wait.
Is this the evolution of like the underpin question mark in the Zekvir?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
So, yeah. Speaking about delves, there's also a new delve called the Archival Assault, which takes place in the Azure Vaults.
The Azure Vault?
Yeah, the Azure Vault from Dragonflight.
Wow.
We're
Okay.
going back.
Like,
Love that.
do we have to travel back to Dragonflight to be able to go there?
No idea, but that's where it's taking place, and I think that's kind of cool. I don't think we spent enough time there, given its significance. I feel like to the plot, but it's time.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I can't wait to see what they're doing with the like. I loved the underpin packs this season. I can't wait to see what Kaiveza's gonna do instead.
Oh, I bet you it's gonna be so cool. Like the daggers, those daggers on the floor look so cool, or clones even. There's so much potential with encounters. Like, oh, all right. So that was the main presentation. Then of course, Wowhead got an exclusive interview with Drew D'Souza and Taylor Sanders, and we talked about many, many cool things about encounters. So let's get the big one out of the way. Many players will be excited to learn that a deserter system is coming to World of Warcraft for Mythic Plus Keystones.
What?
Wow.
So
This is huge. I mean, this is something that people have been asking for a long time, and there's been a lot of concerns about how do you make a version that is not worse than doing nothing. So I'm curious what they've got.
yeah, so they reveal that that these aren't all the details, but there are some general thoughts, and more will be coming on the PTR. Let me just pull this up here. Oops, here we go. So Drew says, yeah, so I don't have all the details. We'll be sharing this as we go live with Ghost of Koresh through PTR, but we're actually introducing a Keystone Deserter system. The rough summary, and again, there'll be more details that come out as we progress through the PTR cycle, is you will need to put up an abandon vote, essentially on a dungeon if things aren't working well. And if the group agrees, you disband. There's no harm, no foul to your rating or anything like that. If you are leaving keys too often in this first iteration, we're not going to penalize you on an account level. You'll just be marked as someone who leaves often. So in Group Finder, you're going to see this player quits.
Okay.
That said, if you're on good behavior and you're finishing keystones or using the abandoned system appropriately, you'll lose that mark as well. This is the first iteration. We're going to take a bunch of feedback, but we do view this as a problem. We want to build a tool for players to agree that the key is over and punish players that suddenly vanish. We're going to roll it out carefully and make sure that we get feedback along the way, so it'll be iterated on. So Tettles, you're laughing. What's going on there?
Just the marks the players as somebody who leaves frequently is just kind of a funny way of doing it. I don't think that this is necessarily a bad thing. I think that, players who play with a consistent 5-stack, this is going to be business as usual. This isn't going to change anything. I think that there are a lot of people who will leave at the wrong time, mostly because their decision making is pretty bad with things. There are people who are just like generally griefers though, and I think that Blizzard, at least in season 1, stated that they were going to start banning people that were intentionally leaving a strong amount of keys, or they use some very strong wording on that. I think that this is probably mostly positive. I do worry that there could be maybe some potential pitfalls. Like if you ever felt like you were held hostage in a dungeon, for example, that would feel bad, but it seems like you can still leave even regardless. And so maybe it doesn't matter.
Yeah, the fact that it doesn't actually apply an immediate penalty when you leave one key is, I think, a really important part of this, because most of the downsides that I was imagining with a system like this would involve a case where you are kind of being held hostage, right? In fact, a toxic person can grief your key and then not leave, and then whoever does leave first would be getting a penalty. But if it has to happen in multiple keys, the risks of that being abused are just so much lower. Like it's so hard for that to happen to you multiple times in different groups by accident, right? Like that. It can happen. I'm sure it will to a few people, but I think that the way of doing this, where you basically are taking a social problem and then designing a social solution of, okay, we will mark you in the group finder, is a really good way to...
That's so good.
Yeah, I think this is a really good... And again, the fact that you have to do multiple levers, like it has to be a pattern from you rather than based off of one, keystone, is, I think, a really huge part of this as well. Hopefully it's calibrated to the point that it actually, takes the bottom 5% of most egregious levers and actually at least them and maybe some more and gets them marked so that they either change their behavior or
Dude,
people stop inviting them.
Imagine it says it's like a red flag next to it says top 5% lever on it.
Yeah. I mean,
it's like levers queue or what's the low priority queue in League called? I think it's called
yeah.
Dota has it too, yeah.
That's a fairly common system, right? Where you kind of get put into like a toxic, dishonorable state, and you end up having like nastier queue times or something, and that's basically what this is going to do, right? Like your queue time is going to get a little hurt. Hopefully not to the point where you can't get into a group and then fix it, but and hopefully it gives you some feedback to let you know that you have had this applied to you, rather than just all the groups seeing it and you not seeing it. That would be kind of funny.
Shadow ban. No, I mean I hope they know for sure. I'm curious to see like how punishing it is, because if you get this, I have a feeling that a lot of people are just going to be permanently blacklisted from keys if this mark ever goes on you. Yeah,
I mean, who would invite somebody with this kind of mark on them? You'd have to be like very confident that you were just going to carry the key, because this person might leave at the first sign of difficulty. So maybe they have to go into lower level keys than their eye level and score would suggest, right? Like you're somebody who can do +8s and you end up having to queue up for some +3s that'll invite you because you've got enough eye level and score that you look good to them, and then you clear your penalty that way. Or maybe the penalty could go away over time if you don't, the first time it gets applied to you, even if you don't fix it by being good in keys, if you just wait a week, it goes away, and it's like, okay, if you do this again, it's going to get applied and it's not going to go away.
I think you probably would just list your own key at that point, right? If it gets
True, yeah, listing your own key. Although hopefully this lets people know that the person listing their own key is going to leave too, because even though you're not risking your key, you still are risking your time by queuing up with somebody like that.
Yeah. So
yeah,
big change to the system. I'd be really curious to see how this plays out. Like, I'm glad that Blizzard is addressing it, honestly, because I think it is a problem in the LFG, and a lot of people use LFG. So this shows that Blizzard's going to do something here about it.
Just one more thing. I do think that a lot of people complain about levers too, but they aren't necessarily just complaining about that person that left. They were complaining that person, it's not that person is a chronic lever, it's that person in the moment made a very bad decision on a dungeon that was still timeable. And so I'm really interested in seeing how many people actually do end up getting flagged as chronic levers.
I think it's definitely good that they're doing it, or that they're trying to do something. It is important that this doesn't have too many false negatives or false positives, right? Like if they can't design a system that doesn't accidentally catch people who aren't doing anything wrong, then they shouldn't do anything. But as long as they can, then this is going to be really good.
How do you feel about the voting to like end
that seems really good, because I think that's often a common complaint about proposed implementations of this would be that everybody wants to leave and nobody can, because the first person to leave is going to incur a deserter penalty, right? And that if you could just vote your way out of it, that's really good.
I think the vote also, like, say you're mad, right? Like, you're running it down in League of Legends. You throw up the vote FF at 15, they vote no, and you're just like you're still tilted, but you're gonna continue to play it out because they voted no against you. You're not just gonna like rage leave the group most of the time. And I think that like if 4 people in the group think that the key is still timeable, that kind of holds that person who threw up the vote to want to leave the dungeon. It kind of holds them a little bit more accountable on the key.
Yeah, League has had to do like a lot of making it harsher to leave, because the initial penalties that they put in just weren't enough to discourage people from doing that behavior that the other players don't like. So I think that there's some worry that WoW is going to have to do that as well, because if you just put up a surrender vote and everybody else votes no, to some extent you might have this experience of like, oh, everybody else thinks it's still timeable, we should keep going, versus some people who will respond to that with like, how are these idiots think this is still timeable? It's so clearly depleted. I'm still going to leave, and or I'm not going to leave, but I'm going to start like intentionally griefing because I'm now mad at them and I've triggered road rage or whatever.
In the older system, I mean, they would have instantly left anyways, right?
Yeah, so exactly.
I think that there is. I don't want to use the term. I don't think the word friction is necessarily the best like word here, but there's like something that will actually like make you take pause, and especially if all 4 other people believe that the key is still timeable, would be like, okay, maybe I should reassess here.
I wonder if this should work differently based on whether the key is flagged as like beat timer or for completion. Like,
oh, interesting.
Because I think that would maybe make some sense, right? Because there are some keys where kind of the social contract is we're gonna leave if it's gonna be depleted, and then there are some where it's like, hey, even if it's gonna be depleted, as long as it's not gonna take us an hour, we want the gear out of this, right?
Yeah. It's kind of interesting. I hope that it doesn't like make it take a lot longer if you're playing like a 5-man group to actually get the dungeon like canned, right? Like, are you going to be able to like zone out as a 5-man group, or do you have to like FF out of it and then be able to zone out?
It's a good question.
Kind of that would be kind of like a weird thing that happens, right? Like, not that it actually causes you anything more than a couple seconds, but it would be like a weird restriction to be like, you can't zone out, you haven't FF'd.
The one thing I know for sure is if you log into the PTR, I'm going to be testing all the ways the lever system works, so sorry in advance.
You're going to see, if you see Dratnos with the red flag next to him,
no, I'm going undercover. I'm going to have some characters with unknown name. I'm going to be the most toxic person, and it's for testing purposes, so you can't get mad at me.
He said it's not. They said it's not account bound, so like you could just keep making new characters on the PTR.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's again. I'm testing. I'm doing testing. Important work here.
I think the last kind of question that I have for you is: do you think the key holders' vote should be worth more?
No.
Kind of. I mean, they are losing more than the other people. So how many people should have to vote to surrender the key, right? Should it be, what, like 3 or 4?
That's another good question. Yeah, is it majority or
maybe 3 with the key holder or 4 without? So maybe the key holder's vote kind of gets doubled that way, something like that? I don't know. Because the key holder is losing more when the key gets depleted. Oftentimes when there's a situation where 4 people want to stop the key and 1 person wants to continue, the 1 person who wants to continue is the key holder.
Why did you say no, Tettles?
Why I think that their vote shouldn't matter more.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that in general, it's everybody kind of has skin in the game, right? Like, you might say that the key holder has a little bit more collateral at stake since it is their key and ultimately it can go down. At the same time, I mean, everybody's there to time the key. Nobody's there. Very infrequently are there people there that their intentions are to not time this dungeon.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I guess it's probably better if it's consistent as well. That it's just like either 3 people or 4 people need to vote.
Yeah, I mean it's also kind of this weird situation as well where if you're queued up with like a couple of friends, like say you're queued up with like 3 friends and you have 2 people who are voting yes to abandon the dungeon, and 3 people are like we were actually doing this key for completion, we want the rewards, and they keep voting no. Like, is there a way that you give them a penalty or give that person who wants to leave the dungeon a penalty? At the same time, it seems like if you do it infrequently enough and you're like, dude, these people are holding me hostage, you're not going to actually receive a penalty for it, which I think is important.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely one of the problems here. League actually doesn't let you queue as a 4-stack because of how toxic 4-stacks can be, and they can like abuse the game systems to grief, the 5th person that queues up with them, right? And I think there's definitely some risk of that, right? Because like if 4 people need to vote to make it not happen, and then you do a key and you queue in with a 4-stack, and I guess they could either surrender the key without you, or they could just they could refuse to surrender it. In fact, even 2 or 3 people could refuse to surrender a key and like hold you hostage that way, which
I mean,
but again,
we're talking about bad actors here, but most people I think are pretty reasonable more often than not.
Right.
I think that this is going to be a non-thing for 98% of people who interact with LFG Mythic Plus, in my opinion.
And most of the downside risks here would come from a system where you'd get punished for 1 bad key, but because you don't, even if there's a toxic 4-stack, they could be running around and like causing black marks to go on the records of several players. But if it's just 1 mark, that's not going to do anything to those players. So the downside there is minimized because of that decision. So yeah, it sounds like they've really thought this through. I'm not surprised. It's one of those systems where people have been asking for some kind of thing like this for a really long time. So I'm sure that there's been a lot of work to try and make sure that it'll actually work.
I wonder how many levers they actually have where they felt like this would actually be a nice thing to implement.
The thing is, you don't have to run into that many levers for it to be a very negative experience, right? Like, even if 2% of players are levers, you're queuing with 4 people per key. You run into 1 lever every 4 or 5 dungeons or 6 dungeons that way, and then, like, you do 6 dungeons a day, 1 lever. That's still, like, a really negative experience.
Yeah, I guess from my perspective, it's very rare that I encounter somebody who's, like, egregiously leaving. More often than not, it's somebody who just makes, like, a pretty bad decision on, like, oh, we wiped at this point. The key's probably still timeable, but we wiped, and he thought that it wasn't timeable, and so he bailed. But
Yeah, I
it
mean,
was
Yeah.
still timeable, and that's just like bad decision making on his end.
there's also, an element of depending on how well the key goes, right? Like if you're somebody who carries keystones, you're not going to run into as many levers because somebody who might have left if things went wrong isn't going to leave because things aren't going to go wrong, right? So
Yeah, sure.
if you're pugging keys that are much more likely to be failed, right? If you're trying to actually push your score through the pug system, that's when you're much more likely to run into people who are going to leave versus if you are constantly farming keys that you can single-handedly carry, nobody's
Yeah.
ever going to have a reason to leave.
I think the 10 to 12 area is probably going to be most affected by this. 'Cause that's where the majority of people do their keys. So
I think it's I think it's like the 12 to 15 range is what I would kind of like, that low resilient key range.
I
is
think
kinda
now, but like early season, like the 10
Yeah.
to 12 range, where
Oh,
I think it's gonna be
sure.
really difficult. Like that,
It's
you're
interesting
gonna
as well
see a
because
lot.
early season you're doing keys for gear, late season you're doing keys for score, right?
True.
So like that change that again might be a reason to have it behave differently based on if you tag the key as for score or for completion. Because like early season, I'm gonna want to finish that +10 even if it's depleted. I want that gear.
I like this idea. I like this differentiation. If they can make a change to the system and have there be a slight differentiation on whether or not it's for completion versus for score, I would love that.
Again, we don't actually know how it's going
Yeah.
to work yet. We're just speculating.
I mean, I think it's good feedback for them because like this could be like they said, this is the first iteration. Like maybe the second iteration they take into account that if you are for time, to make sure that you get the score, like you can cancel it whenever you want the second you wipe or whatever. But if it's like for completion, you need to wipe till like it's boss 3 or 4 times, like get fake determination stacks or
Well,
something.
You'd have to FF out of it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can just make the surrender vote harder to do, like if you're like on pace to not necessarily time, but like be close to the timer, right?
Yeah.
Like you can make the surrender vote require 5 instead of 4 or 3 or whatever. In depending, the game can detect how screwed you are in the key, right? Whether
Yeah.
you spent 20 minutes and not
Over
killed
the
boss
timer
yet.
or something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Alright.
Again, hopefully they iterate on this nicely and it starts at a level that's not too harsh and they
I like
make
it.
it harsher over time. But yeah, this is
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm very glad to see them do something about this because it was a big problem for a lot of players.
Absolutely. So, Dratnos, question for you: what's been the hottest topic in your Mythic Plus circle?
Hottest topic in my Mythic Plus circle. Recently, it's been resilient keys, but mostly a hot topic because I think people are generally really happy with them, and it's just there are like a few edge cases where, or maybe even just the fact that not everybody always gets to use them is the point that has been has caused some discourse. So.
Yeah.
Was that the right answer?
That is the right answer. So we asked about resilient keys and how they went because this is the first season that had them. So Drew said, no immediate changes planned. We're pretty happy with how this landed. I've heard a lot of players just talk about how it's fun to work on them, and it feels like you're climbing over a new tier as you finish a whole row of resilient keys. I personally like it myself, so big fan of how they work. We think they're in the right place in the system, where they're deep into endgame, more like prestige, and not a part of the core rewards loop. So no plans to change that there. And they're happy with them.
Yeah, I was thinking about like resilient keys seem like they would be really nice to have for more casual players that don't get up to the level where they start. Like if you're somebody who's doing low keys. But then I was thinking about it, and it's like if you made all the keys resilient, you do lose that part of, oh, I've timed all the 12s, now I have resilient 12s. Oh, I've timed all the 13s, now I have resilient 13s. Like that's, if you look at people's stream titles or what they tweet or put in Discord about what they've accomplished in WoW, a lot of it is like, hey, I got resilient 19s, right? Like that, I got resilient 16s, right? Like those are accomplishments that incrementally exist in Mythic Plus as you climb up that ladder. That is definitely a really nice thing to have. So
Yeah.
I don't know. Resilient keys are an interesting system where it's clearly a really cool and good thing that they are adding to the game, and yet it also immediately begs the question of like, in what ways should they do more or less than this, right? Should there be places where resilient keys don't exist? Should there be places where resilient keys exist that they don't currently? And I'd be curious to see them experiment with some things, but I think it makes a lot of sense this season. It'll just be their second season of existing. We can keep seeing how they play as they are now.
I think probably I would say like 90% of people who interact with resilient keys have a pretty positive experience, and particularly those who are playing with, I would describe it as the solo player experience, right? You're utilizing them in LFG. It is a really good protection case for your key to not go down. I had an experience this season where I wiped the last boss of 14 Workshop, and at the end of that day, I ended up with an 11. I was so mad that I had an 11 because I was on the cusp of timing a 14. And why do I have an 11? And right, and resilient keys give you that kind of floor, right? Like in theory, if I had resilient 13s, I would have never have ended up with an 11. Instead, I would have just dropped down and done a 13. I will say that there are probably there's a couple of edge cases. I do wish they would maybe iron out a bit with the resilient system, but I do think that by and large, I'm glad that they're bringing it back because I think it's a fairly solid system just as a whole.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, again, like the fact is, so you are citing a negative experience that you've had because you didn't have resilient keys, and that's part of the reason I think maybe it would be good to make it a little bit less restrictive to actually earn them, maybe make them apply one level up than the levels you've all timed or something like that. But again, I'm happy with them keeping it as is for now. I'm happy with that.
The negative experience that I have with the resilient system normally involve like just the concept that somebody's homework key is somebody else's like golden ticket to be able to constantly do and like learn and practice a dungeon. And I use the term progress sometimes, and people think any dungeon that you're like getting +1 on is a progression dungeon, but that's not necessarily true. It's a dungeon that's like close to what your skill cap is. And I think that the progression of dungeons doesn't feel very satisfying whenever you're
right. And I think that's part of the reason why they don't want to make resilient keys just like how keys work, for instance, or because they want players who are progressing to play, you know, the keys where they can deplete, right, and where you have to actually the run matters. You can't just restart it over and over again until you figure it out, right? So I get that, but then that leads to one of the other problems with resilient keys is that some people do get to use the resilient keys for their progression, and I'm not sure there is a better system than what they've got right now. They've got a really good system.
People throw out like tries, and I think that tries would just be a worse system than it currently is. Because the advantages of the resilient system, I think that they're like very good. It gives you the ballot protection, but it also allows you to kind of like take chances on people in LFG, and you would list a key in LFG that you otherwise wouldn't in the past because you're kind of gambling on who you're gonna get sign up for the dungeon. So I think the resilient system needs to stay. I wouldn't hate if they cooked on it a little bit more and maybe try to improve some of these fringe cases where the system can feel unfun, but I'm glad they're bringing it back.
The changes I would start by making to it would be increasing how many people get to use it, because most of the problems I have with resilient keys are just the parts where some people have them and some people don't, right? Like if you're a group leader listing your 12 and it's resilient versus if it's not, like you're having a very different experience. And so I guess if I could propose one change, it'd be like, what if we made it so you have to do half the 12s instead of all the 12s to get resilient 12s, right? It's like when you get halfway over that point, then you get resilient to that level, something like that.
I would have gone the other direction, because here's the thing is like, the community uses the term homework keys, right? In theory, you're not supposed to be depleting homework keys, and you don't if you're playing in a consistent 5 stack. But what happens whenever you're not playing in a consistent 5 stack and somebody has the resilient +1, and then you're in a situation where you're like throwing a bunch of attempts at a dungeon that's homework for that other person, but it's not homework for you. That's like your next level up. And it's not that they're not qualified to be in the dungeon. Say they have, 6 16s and 2 15s, and they're trying to get their 16 resilient. It's because Priory of the Sacred Flame is like 2 key levels harder than the other dungeons. So then you could just run down 10, 15 attempts on Priory of the Sacred Flame on that 16 and still not necessarily time it.
Yeah, that's bad, but that's bad because Priory is too hard relative to the other dungeons. And I think it's worse that you instead just don't get resilient keys until you can time a Priory at that level, and you can easily do all the other keys. Yeah, and that's bad. So I would like to see that.
Yeah,
I'm happy to see them do no changes. I think resilient keys, there's like a lot of stuff they could do that would make it worse, and no changes is a pretty good outcome. But I'm also I think there's some room to cook there.
It's one of those things. It's like if you're ever presenting with the opportunity, remove them or keep them. I'm always selecting keep them.
Yes.
I don't think that's ever an argument.
Yeah, you and I have both caught some flack for talking about resilient key changes that could be made, and I think people might have heard that we want them removed from that, and we certainly do not. We are in favor of the system.
I think maybe 95% of the time that I've utilized them, they're good. I've enjoyed it. It's just like there's some elements where I'm just like, this is unfun. I wish they would be different.
Yeah. All right. Well, another problem and discussion topic recently has been threat in Mythic Quest Dungeons.
Oh my god, please say the reworking threat, please.
So we asked this question before the recent threat buffs, just to be clear, but they answered for us here. And the top answer is, fundamentally, we do believe that managing threat is part of the tanking equation. That's gameplay that both players have on the DPS side of the healing side, and also you have plenty of tools on the tanking side to be able to tackle your threat level and how the monsters are reacting to you. That being said, this is a frustration we've also felt. We know that there's a lot of feedback on this point. We're planning the Ghost of Koresh update to take a swing at this. It can be particularly frustrating when you're a few item levels behind your fellow tank in a raid setting, and you feel like you're doing everything, executing your rotation well, and your fellow tank is just ripping threat from you. What we don't want players to feel is that they're doing everything within their power at a reasonable item level, and the encounter is harder because of their fellow tank ripping threat off them. So we want you to be able to play with your fellow tank, execute your rotation, and feel like there's not an additional hoop to jump through there. Drew chimes in and says, to add to that, I think Taylor's point of it being important that you're not ripping off a tank 30 or 40 seconds into a pull. But there is some gameplay here in having the tank gather some mobs. There's player tools like Misdirect and tricks that help you do it. It's really about sustained threat is where I think we see the problem currently is in our discussions. But there's some core let the tank gather mobs gameplay that we do like.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that it's one of those things that is true, is that threat should matter. You shouldn't just instantly get threat on everything for free. There's problems with kiting if you do that, right? Where like you just grab everything and then you run. Also, if you're just a tank that's not doing your rotation right, you should lose threat to, that should be part of the problem. If you don't press your damaging buttons, then you're going to lose some threat. But on the other hand, I think the current equilibrium, at least pre-threat buff, but I think still, especially with the stat going up that we're going to get next season, is going to be too much in the direction of you can be doing things mostly right and still losing threat to your co-tank, your Dev Evoker, your Fury Warrior, your Frost DK, like all of those things I think are still too prevalent. So I'm glad to see them hopefully tune that further.
Yeah, I think that I'm hopeful that they're stating that there are problems, because them recognizing problems I think is part of it. I do think that, the 15% threat buff that we got recently, a lot of people cited that as a band-aid. I'm never going to complain about a 15% threat buff, but ultimately it doesn't. I think that threat is most problematic. I mean, you guys can talk about raid. I mean, both of you guys have tanked raid, but I think it's most problematic in Mythic Plus, particularly whenever you have like a Blood Beast proc while the Unholy DKs in their cooldowns, and they proc this Blood Beast and it just pops off after 15 seconds and just rips the entire pack off the tank. Where the only solution for the Unholy DK is to have logged out of the game, paid $25, faction change to Night Elf, logged back in, press Shadow Meld right before the Blood Beast went off so he could drop all of his threat. Is that really the solution that we really want to see? I think the answer is mostly not. Or the Elemental Shaman, I'll log in my Ellie Shaman, my first global in a pack sometimes will be Tempest, and it just rips the entire pack off the tank after he's actually pressed damaging globals into it, and he's pressed like 3 or 4 globals on it, and I'm just like, is this...
Yeah.
Is this really supposed to be the experience? And it just feels really bad for everybody involved. And it's not that the tank is necessarily even doing the wrong action. It's that some of these DPS specializations, I think Dev Evoker has it. It's got it. They have to have the word.
Yeah. Like you're supposed to open with Dragon Rage and some engulfs, and you press that engulf button and you crit, and it's like, oh no.
Yeah.
Uh-oh.
The pack is just glued to them. Like
it's like you ever played Left 4 Dead and you accidentally hit a car and the alarm starts going off and all the zombie hordes start running at you. That's the experience of critting your 2 engulfs on Dev Evoker and keys. So
yeah,
I think that, and I do think raid is also a problem. Like if you're in raid and you're similar eye level, but you're playing a low damage tank spec and your co-tank is playing a high damage tank spec, it can be very frustrating. Like that can be a spot where you basically have to resign yourself to like, yeah, they're just going to hold threat and I'm going to press taunt right before I need to every time. And like that, I think that making it so that bosses are stickier on the tank that they're currently on would be really good for raid.
Raid is really interesting because it's really punishing when you screw it up. Like if you ever pull threat off the other tank, you just die. Like I'd say on like half the bosses, you just instantly die from the next melee attack because there's a debuff on them that just causes you to die. But Drew mentioned that they feel like the issue is sustained threat, where it sounds like you guys feel like the issue is burst threat.
I think it's
both for sure.
To me, it's like,
so it's everything.
I think so. Like I when I'm tanking raid, I sometimes, if I'm playing like one of my lower damage tank specs or something, and my co-tank's playing a higher damage one, like I can lose threat, just like over 15 seconds, and it's just I'm doing less damage, and especially with the way hero talents work right now, right? Like they're playing a demon hunter, they proc a couple hunts, and all of a sudden that's like huge extra damage, and yeah, so I think it can be sustained even in M+, right? Like you can be losing threat 15 seconds into a pull, 20 seconds into a pull. I guess it is a burst threat instance of like the Blood Beast popping that is causing that, but it's not just the the issue isn't just that in the first 3 globals I don't have threat, right? The issue is like I can do my rotation mostly right, and I can still be losing threat 15 seconds into a pull.
I don't like tank abilities that are target capped either. I think that that's maybe part of the problem, but I don't think it's necessarily just the full issue. It's kind of these, at least in my experience, these burst moments. I think just philosophically, how I feel like threat should work is if my tank is actively pressing damage globals on the pack, they probably should just have threat. The mob should just be glued to them. I don't necessarily care how it happens. I'm not married to any idea. I think it's just like if my tank is actively hitting the pack and my Havoc Demon Hunter isn't opening up on and eye-beaming mobs that are 30 yards away that the tank hasn't hit, like they should get melee to death and die. I think that they should absolutely get melee to death and die. And bar those situations, my tank should just have threat on the mobs.
They're right that there is some DPS player agency here, but it's not fun agency. If the agency is I shouldn't press my damage globals for 10 seconds and wait for 3 Sunders, like we should leave that gameplay in Classic. That shouldn't be how it works. The agency should mostly be on the tanks, but the problem is that tanks don't have a lot of agency to do more damage. Yoda made a good video recently where he looked over like a log and is like, hey, here's all the damage that was from me spending extra rage on damage on Revenge, and it's like, a fraction of his damage, almost all of his damage comes from pressing his hero talent one time, and then from other rotational stuff that isn't representing trying to do more damage. So if Blizzard wants tanks to have to press damage globals to get some threat, they should make those abilities do some damage or at least do some extra threat.
In addition to that as well, I think it's a situation where, how do I even describe this? Yeah, I guess it just kind of comes down to, maybe there's just like philosophical differences from how the players want to play it and like how the, but like, dude, tanks die all the time because somebody's like ripping threat off of them. It's not
right. That's the thing.
Is DPS thing. Like I've seen the tanks. The tank panics. Like the DPS is panicking, goes taunt, and the tank is like, oh my god, hold on, right?
If you're playing Vengeance Demon Hunter, your first 5 globals are setting up your defenses because you want to set up your defenses. If you're trying to get threat instead, unless you have like a Feldev ready, you're not going to be able to do both at the same time. So it is definitely, I think, something where the philosophy. It sounds solid on paper, but it definitely needs to shift more in the direction of tanks by default having threat if they're mostly doing stuff right.
I kind of also understand what they're saying about tanks kiting. I question whether or not that's true in 2025. Now, I know in 2018 back in Legion, tanks kited just the snot out of the pack, right? You would drag mobs around Neltharian's lair for minutes at a time, right? With like 60 mobs. I don't know if you would actually do that in the current year, just because first off, they're just adding more casters straight up into every single pack, but more as well, like you care about tank damage. Tank damage is like back in Legion we were just bad, but like tank damage matters.
If it was possible to pull twice as many mobs and then kite them, and your group was just AoEing them down while you were kiting, like that would still be good. But you're right, there's a lot of safe gaps towards preventing that being possible, right? We don't have Arcane Torrent just keeping the pack silenced for a full year. So
yeah,
I think there's not too much risk of that, even if they made a change that made kiting have a little bit more threat. And there are also changes you could make to threat that wouldn't buff kiting threat. You could make it so that, melee abilities of tanks generate more threat and the ranged ones don't, right? And like you could make it so threat decays still after 10 seconds of not being in melee or 5 seconds of not being in melee. It starts decaying more aggressively. Like there are changes you could make that would target kiting threat and still buff single target, in combat threat.
They could change the rip threshold a lot, I think, and maybe change that.
Yeah, like making it so that non-tanks have to reach a higher threshold to rip off of a tank, for instance. Although that wouldn't fix the problem of raid tanks ripping threat, which is the main case of that threshold mattering.
Side note, I know they're going to be like looking to tackle add-ons maybe in future expansion seasons, whatever. Threat is only something that you can see with an add-on. Yeah,
well, you do get the nameplate warning that's like losing threat.
As it happens. As it happens.
Yeah, the problem is that Engulf takes you from 0 to you've gained threat over all of the levels of warning that the game's going to give you on the nameplates.
I think philosophically, like the players and Blizzard are in agreement with philosophically that tanks should hold by pressing buttons. The problem is it's not the reality, and I think that. Yeah,
and the problem is also that it only comes up if you're playing with like really good dev evokers, really good, melee DPS that are ripping threat. Like if you're not doing that, they're not going to be doing rip threat levels of numbers. And the tank rotations are set up such that if you're a medium good tank, you're doing pretty good threat, right? Whereas if you're a medium good dev evoker, I guess dev evoker's a bit of an outlier because Engulf is such an easy button to do full damage with. But most other specs that do rip threat won't from a medium tank, right? Like a medium Fury Warrior is less likely to rip threat from a medium tank than a good or great Fury Warrior is from a great tank.
All right. Well, we asked another Mythic Plus question about how do you feel like Season 2 went? And, well, they thought it was pretty positive. Drew kind of said the really high-level answer for you is I'd like Season 3 to feel a lot like Season 2. Some philosophical stuff we did here. We took a look at how often things are casting, how long cast bars are, whether they're interruptible or not, and trying to have less bait interrupts. If a creature has a cast bar to put up a dot and we want you to dispel it, just put up the dot and let's not add the quiz there. I think another philosophical change here is in that spirit of let's just put less cast bars on screen was the tank buster change. I think that was really healthy. That's something else we're going to keep doing. We're going to look at Season 1 dungeons that are in the pool for Season 3 and those legacy dungeons and take similar paths. I think another thing that went really well was actually the help from the community. Something that we did differently that wasn't in the season itself, but I think heavily influenced the season is how we did testing on the PTR. We had a much more focused dungeon pool every week, and that helped us to get data from you guys on what feels bad or what feels out of band or what feels too easy even, and we were able to concentrate that data. So they want to keep...
They reworked Rookery in the middle of the PTR too. Like Rookery launched on the PTR and it had like 5 times as many casts. Everybody I knew was like, this dungeon is demonic. And then the Blizzard came through, you know what? Not that many casters. We don't need that many casters. They removed a bunch of them. I would love for them to maybe relook at how many casters are in Priory of the Sacred Flame. Philosophically, he's 100% spot on. And if Season 2 ends up feeling, or Season 3 ends up feeling how Season 2 did, I think that they are on pace to have another fantastic season. People complained a lot about how the dungeons felt in Season 1 because they were just frankly way too hard, just straight across the board. The levels of which you were doing felt like it was too low relative to the rewards that you were gaining. They changed that. They made sure that you could get rewards better. They also made a decision point at 12s. You were getting a new mount from that. Well, it wasn't exactly at 12s, but it was like half 12s, half 13s.
Yeah, some 12s, some 13s.
A 3K IO achievement. Yeah. Fantastic too. I think that all of the steps that they were making this season were in the right direction, and I am glad that they're continuing to move further into that process. And I think it's kind of proven that players prefer maybe something that's a little bit easier in Mythic Plus than we had in Season 1. It doesn't have to be like, we don't have to go back to Classic, but it can be a little bit easier and still be fun. Yeah,
I mean, it's an infinitely scaling system. If the content gets easier in terms of how much mechanical overload there is, then we get to push it so that the numbers are harder and we're doing higher DPS checks and stuff, and that's, I think, really fun for a lot of players. So, I think this is a really good. I think it's a really good season. I don't think it's perfect or anything, and I don't think them saying this means that they think it's perfect either. But I think that they're generally on the right track, so that's good.
Fun doesn't. I mean, it can be fun and it still be jank, right? Like
exactly.
We like jank stuff all the time, right? Corruption was jank, but it was still fun.
I think that definitely, again, right? Like Season 2, has been moving the game in a great direction. Season 3 should continue that trend, or at least not reverse it, and Mythic Plus will continue to be great.
I mean, the tank buster change alone, as you mentioned, was
huge. Yeah,
massive for getting tanks actually wanting to play the game, which already low number of tanks. So LFG rejoices.
Yeah.
All right. Well, another change that happened recently that we asked about was the change to stops. That is using a CC on a cast bar and having it recast. And Drew also answered this, and he says, we think the game is in a healthier place overall with the way they work now in the War Within. So that is kind of their statement there. That said, I think the changes we made in Season 2, as he just talked about, specifically to how often things cast at all and how long cast bars are, put us in a healthier place. You're still seeing keys pushed up in the 20s even after this change, and we do understand that it requires a little more coordination at a higher level to execute some of these bigger pulls, but I think that's acceptable. You're at the bleeding edge of a system, and that's okay. The core experience of 1 to 10 or even up to 12 is very doable and very reasonable, even a pug setting after the change. So in summary, we're happy with it.
Sounds like he's actually talking directly to us, where he says whatever he's like citing those things, right? You're at the bleeding edge of the system.
Yeah, I will say I feel like the stop change still gets you in a 12 if you're depending on your composition as well. It can be. I think that. So I would disagree that it's been positive. I would agree that M+ has been still good despite it. I think that's like it's been the best season of M+ in a long time, and it has featured this change. So clearly it's not that big of a deal breaker of a change to exist, but I do think it's making the game a little bit worse. I think that one of its stated goals is to lower the importance of these AoE stops, and yet I think it's dramatically increased the salience of AoE stops and how many of them your kit has, and whether you happen to have the Sigil of Silence that actually kicks everything, or one of the stops that doesn't actually kick everything.
The Sigil of Silence that kicks everything is only usable in 2 situations this season where it's like, I would say pseudo required. It's not actually required.
Yeah.
It's like pseudo required. It's the Dark Flame Cleft Blazicon room, and it's the first pull of Workshop. I think the bigger thing to me, like I actually don't view those as necessarily big problem points because there's counterplay, I think, on a lot of those. I actually view the abundance of casters in Priory of the Sacred Flame that cast X Bolt or X Ball, right?
Right, which that's not the stop change, right? Like that's like that's something that exists in Priory that's against the philosophy that they've talked about and against the general direction they've been moving, and it's just like they didn't fully succeed in Priory at accomplishing what they've been trying to do.
You can give me like I feel like if you're gonna make the stop change, like you have to cut back on the number of casters that are just
and they have been cutting back, right? It's just like
just this season.
Yeah, but they haven't. Like Priory is a case of like, okay, we didn't cut back enough on that, right?
Yeah. And I think that Priory is an outlier. I do think that this season, generally speaking, it would have been. I think it's easier to play if your stops act as interrupts. I think something that they should be maybe looking to do with mobs as well is increase the cast time on mobs, where they changed the lockout duration a couple of patches ago, and it's a very subtle change. Like it's not something that's like really big, but at the same time, if these mobs are just like spam casting, like what you could have done instead is put that cast on a 5-second cooldown. That way the mage lockout is no different than the DK lockout because the mob is going on a full 5-second cooldown no matter what. And I think that would actually help with something like the stop change.
All right.
But as long as we don't have Grimbatol, it's probably fine.
We do not.
That dungeon was demonic.
I guess the last thing I'll say on the stop change is I think for a lot of people that don't push high keys, the biggest change to the stop change is you can no longer solo creatures in a way. Like if you have to priority kick one mob, you have to have somebody priority kick the second mob. Whereas previously, I could kick one mob, then stun the second mob, and both casts would be satisfied. Like, I think people have this want to play a solo game and not have to rely on others. But unfortunately,
I think it's reasonable for Blizzard to not want that. For me, the big problem in Pugs is like, dude, if I'm doing a Pug and I know there's an important kick and I go to kick it, and then some idiot Demon Hunter Chaos Novas it and stuns it, and my kick gets munched that way, I get really mad. That's part of the reason why I think the Council Demon Hunter fight should be undertuned to represent Demon Hunters not having too much brain cells, because they just throw those Chaos Novas out at just the stupidest times.
Well, it's damage gain. It's a damage gain. You would understand.
Yeah. That's I think to me that's like the frustrating part of the biggest frustrating part in Pugs is the fact that your kick gets munched if the mob gets stunned or something as you're pressing your kick. Which I mean, I guess it's a game mode about coordination and about group play and stuff like that. It's just that it feels like you're getting punished for trying to help.
I agree with that. I wish there was another way to signify like I'm kicking next. Like other games, you have a dedicated ping for it. Like if you question mark ping, you're saying I'm kicking next or something. But like nothing like that exists in WoW right now.
We can have world markers, but like world markers aren't like that. It's just not that big of an indicator of like, oh, I'm going for the next kick here.
The ping system, like if there was a new ping that's like kicking next ping, and you could keybind doing it to your target, but like people wouldn't do that unless it was like done by default as a new. Like if they were like, hey, here's a new button that says you're about to kick.
Agreed.
Or just they could just make kicks have a cast time, and then you could see that your friend was casting a kick. Well, so it's a nice 2-second cast of doing their kick.
If instead of a world marker, say you could actually just like attach your kick to the frame, right? And you could see counter spells coming up in 3, 2, 1 counter spells available, and you've like attached your kick as opposed to a focus marker. You're using a different kind of marker, right? You're attaching your kick to it, so that way somebody can see that you are looking at that mob at least as your focus kick.
You could do something like that and then just have a virtual queue almost. Like if let's say your keybind is like V or something, you press V on it, your spec icon shows up next to it, and then and that says like I'm next in queue to kick this mob, and when you kick, it just removes it, kind of thing. Like, does it make it easier, more accessible? Yes. Is that good for the game? I don't know.
I mean, it sounds like they're removing interrupt trackers in the future. Maybe it wouldn't be good for the game. I don't know. I think they're moving Mythic Plus in the right direction, though. I think that lowering the complexity of Mythic Plus, I think, is universally a pretty praised change.
Exactly. The stop change itself, I don't like. I like all the things that they want to do to make the stop change less punishing. Like all the things about making cast times better and all those sorts of things are just good changes, whether or not there's a stop change as well.
They have sometimes talked about how they like to give better visual clarity to mobs when they're casting. I'm going to be honest, I do see it sometimes. The bigger issue with the visual clarity on mobs when they're casting is there are 4 other mobs that surround that mob more often than not. I can't see this guy's VFX on him casting or not. Like, I wasn't gonna be able to, like, the Arakara mobs, they glow big and green whenever they're casting the volley. You can't, like, I can't see it. There's like 3 mobs that are standing on top of that guy. Like, I can't tell that he's casting if I'm just looking at him.
It's gonna be tough, but all right. The interesting thing here is we mentioned the Tazavesh dungeon is coming back, but in M0 it's going to work a little differently. There is no M0 Tazavesh that you know it. Instead, the hard mode mega dungeon is coming back.
Oh, love it.
So the default for Tazavesh Mythic 0 is hard mode. The simple way of putting it here is there's 6 M0 dungeons and then 1 mega dungeon on hard mode. It's going to be tuned like a 10. It's going to be rewarded like a 10. And potentially even give you a 10 vault. We'll see on that last detail. We really want to make that mini raid experience with no timer that players have been clamoring for. People really love mega dungeons. We want to make it worth your time.
So, okay, very quick question. So they're deleting the heroic week. Or not the heroic, sorry. They're deleting that dead week and they're giving you M0s. Are you going to be able to go into hard mode Tazavesh that week 1 and be able to get hero
My guess would be no if it's rewarded like a 10.
I was gonna say you're getting hero track
probably
from that.
do.
Jeez.
Yeah, I think this is sweet though. I remember there was that season where Dawn of the Infinite hard mode existed, and you could actually get hero track loot out of it, but it didn't give you a 10 vault or anything like that. I think that making it give a 10 vault is going to be huge. I think, that seems perfect. Like M+ has been really fun. I love M+, but I know there are a lot of people who do want the difficulty of 5-player content like that without the time constraint. And Mega Dungeon hard modes, I think, is a perfect way to do that. So this seems like the logical next step after. I think that was a really fun season. Like, I had a lot of fun that season doing some hard mode Mechagon, or not Mechagon, Dawn of the Infinite runs, and this seems like it's going to be a very similar vibe.
People love non-time pressured, pretty difficult dungeon content. I've seen that, be requested by people in the community before, and I think that giving them like Tazavesh hard mode, it's not the most replayable thing. If you want replayability, that's going to be what Mythic Plus is for. Ultimately, that's what the replayable content is going to be. I think that giving them a hard mode mega dungeon, there's no downsides here. I think that this, and especially too, since they sound like it's going to be like pretty well compensated. Like, you're going to be pretty well compensated for doing this as an M0. There's no downsides here. I like this.
Yeah. Do you remember Dawn of the Infinite? It had a deathless mode.
Yeah.
If you did it deathless, you actually got myth track.
You get myth track, last boss trinkets or whatever, right? That were
The Mirror of Torbit was a little bit too OP.
That was a little goofy.
Do you think they should do that with Tazavesh? Like, they didn't say anything on it, but I was just kind of like, what's your vibe there?
I didn't like it because it's kind of like needing one very specific piece out of your vault. Right?
Yeah.
It's like you're praying that you get one piece out of your vault, and then every single week you're like, well, I didn't get it. This sucks. And then you see somebody else, and he just high rolled the first week. You're like, wow, that sucks. It just, I think it kind of feels worse than it feels like super great. Especially, I don't know. Especially since it is an M0. M+ is supposed to be, in theory, the pinnacle of dungeon content. Whether or not you actually believe that is up for debate, but it's kind of how Blizzard views it, at least.
I think Deathless hard mode should be like that. Should be a cosmetic thing that you get from that. Like, you get a cool mount or something from that. But I don't like it giving a unique piece of myth track loot, especially if that thing ends up being Turbo Bis for some specs. And that ties in general to, I think, dungeon trinkets that you rely on getting from the vault is an annoying thing right now, where it's like the only way to get that on myth track, like you said, Tettles, is from the vault. So I would love to see them do something to tackle that at the same time too.
But yeah, I'm excited for this. Dawn of the Infinites, like all the way back to, what was it? The first one was Karazhan, I think, and all those were so sweet.
Karazhan, Mechagon, Tazavesh, Dawn of the Infinite, and then this season, I guess we didn't get a mega dungeon this expansion, did we?
We did not, because it was split up amongst the 2 patches. We had Floodgate, now Ecodome. So
I think I think how they're doing this makes more sense with like what Mythic Plus is. I know that some people like the mega dungeons and how the mega dungeons are feeling. I really liked how we got a bunch of new dungeons this season, and with Floodgate and stuff like that, and then Ecodome next season. As somebody who loves Mythic Plus, this feels, at least for me, a little bit better than we get 2 dungeons in a mega dungeon, because they're also they're retooling Tazavesh. It's supposed to kind of be that, even though you've done it before. Like, you can make that argument. I think this is better personally, but that's just my opinion.
I love mega dungeons, so I hope that we aren't going away from the era of them making them. But I also do think this expansion has worked out well. I liked Floodgate, and hopefully I like the Ecodome as well. I love the mega dungeons every time they've done them too, though. So I would be sad if this was moving to the past rather than something that they're going to keep doing in future expansions.
Totally agree. All right. Well, those are most of the dungeon questions we asked. But we're moving on to a very general question. It's a problem in the community in LFG. And that is need versus greed.
Oh my gosh.
We asked, how do you view players who need on every item in LFG just to sell them for gold? Are there any plans to address this? And Taylor says that we're aware that this is a problem. There's been a lot of feedback. It's definitely something we've seen as well as playing the game. We understand that anytime a player is in a difficulty, they go into that difficulty under a certain social contract, and players who are in LFR together or group finder modes often don't come into those modes with a lot of social contracts. So it can be really frustrating to see that item drop that you really want, and another player make off with it or sell it to the highest bidder. We don't have any plans to announce right now, but it's something that we're actively taking a look at and we'd like to address in the future.
Lock it to them. If you need it and you win it, just get bound to you. It shouldn't be this thing that you trade to other people or sell it off to the highest bidder. Literally, if you hit need on it, it just completely locks to you. That does kind of create a weird consequence in raid, where a lot of times, we'll use like RCLC, like RC Loot Council, as like a Loot Council add-on. Everybody will auto pass on all the items. Like, if they could create like a bypass to that, if everybody passed on an item, then somebody could go pick them up off the boss and then trade them to people. That's totally fine. Like, I just think that the selling of loot in heroic raids, where you have 18 people needing on this house of cards, only, let's say, 10 of them actually even need it, and 8 of them are trying to sell it. Like, it's just so toxic.
Yeah, it's weird because, like, if it was personal loot, what would have happened is it would have dropped for one of those players, and then if somebody else wanted it a lot, or if that person wanted to sell it, they could post that, and like, that did happen back in personal loot, but it didn't feel as bad because you didn't see them rolling need on it. Everybody just auto-rolled need because it was personal loot, right?
Well, the issue was that it didn't exist because cross-realm gold trading wasn't a thing back then.
True, yeah, you couldn't actually trade the gold to somebody if they if it dropped an LFR or something like that, yeah.
The second they opened that, the floodgates opened.
I actually saw a reasonable amount of people offering to buy, especially in like early week heroics, they'd be like, yeah, I can get gold onto your server, like.
Yeah.
But there was friction that doesn't exist now to that trade. Yeah.
Yeah.
It just feels gross whenever it's just these people selling it. And because here's the thing too, I actually don't even know if necessarily all these people are like, they're rolling with the intention to sell it. Some people are, but some of these people are rolling with the intention, I would use that. And then some guy in your DMs is like 1.5 million gold, and you're like, well, I guess I'm selling it. Like, I didn't want it that bad.
And I mean, that makes sense, right? Like, it's logical to do that. And it's also logical for everybody to just hit need right now, because there's no reason not to, right? You basically are like, hey, would you like something, or would you like to give it up for the good of a group that you're not... You have no tie to this group, right? You've queued into Group Finder to find it, right? Like or even if it's LFR, you've just hit in the Dungeon Finder to get there. So yeah, I don't know. I kind of feel like personal loot should just come back for LFR, and that would at least remove, because like, you think about it, a lot of the time people feel bad about loot as well. It's like, oh, this person rolled need, but they didn't actually need it. But like, they were doing the LFR because they want the transmog or something like that, and that's a perfectly valid reason for them to have a shot at the gear too, in my opinion. But
yeah,
then there's a transmog button instead, and so that kind of indicates, okay, if you want transmog, you should be pressing the transmog button, but people don't, and it's this whole thing. I don't know. I feel like right now, you kind of, if you're somebody who does feel bad about taking loot from people who need it, and you don't click need, you just kind of get less loot and get less cool stuff because of that, and get less gold because you don't try and sell stuff. And basically those players are getting punished for being honest and nice people, and that sucks.
I see some people just like needing on stuff that they genuinely don't need, trying to use it as trade collateral and be like, well, I'll trade you these tier pants that you need and 500,000 gold for this house of cards. And you're just like,
dude,
you don't need these pants? What is this garbage?
Like literally a Styx item dropped and somebody needed on it, and I was like, hey, you don't need that. And they're like, yeah, I don't need it, but if something good drops later on Bandit, I'll be able to use this to try and sell.
Yeah.
To trade, right?
Like,
it's like, okay.
Briefing me.
I mean, yeah, well, the problem is that you feel entitled to the item because you need it and they don't, because they rolled need. So that's part of why it's like, it feels bad, but it's not like you didn't have your chance of the item. Like, they were an equal part of the group as you. They had an equal role on it and they won that role, right? Like,
it's just kind of like, what does need actually mean, right? Like, there's a lot of people who are needing on items who don't need those items, and that's what I'm just saying. Just lock it to them. Do not let them trade it, and then that cuts all.
People will still press need on something that they don't actually need, and it'll still feel bad, right? And like now they can't even rectify it by realizing, oh, I don't actually need that. Here, you can have it, right? Which is like, that's a really positive thing when that happens.
I think the selling part's the part that annoys me the most.
Yeah, certainly.
Not that I haven't bought items, because that's kind of how you play the game right now, but like that to me is the part that annoys me the most.
Yeah. I mean, I'd be curious what they do about this, because I think if people want to sell it, people are going to do it, unless they just flat out say, like, you know, GDKP and Classic, where they're just like,
right, you could just ban it that way.
This is just banned.
Yeah.
But, you know, they just have to actually enforce it, because sometimes they're a little lax on their rules. So we'll have to see what Blizzard does. I'm glad that they acknowledge that it's a problem, at least, because I think that has definitely frustrated a good chunk of the community. All right. Well, we're moving on to the raid stuff now. Of course, we had encounter designers. We had to ask about the raid, and one of the most popular topics about the last raid tier was Mythic Gallywix. And so we asked, how do you view Mythic Gallywix's overall difficulty in hindsight? And so Taylor answered, so the race to world first, I think aside, these are generally really dedicated folks, and it's a small group of our players. I think feedback has largely been positive on the difficulty, as you say with Mythic Gallywix. Mechanically, I think it's a great fight. It's visually spectacular, I think. From a narrative perspective as well, it's a great fitting in for one of WoW's most iconic and persistent villains across its history. From a difficulty perspective, I think where it's landed for the general community is reasonable. I think where we may have done things differently in hindsight is its difficulty relative to the boss preceding it. Mugsy was really difficult, and it was fairly unprecedented in modern WoW that the penultimate boss and the final boss were so close together in their difficulty. So we would have liked a little bit bigger of a gap there between those two encounters. But Mythic Gallywix, I think, ultimately was a great fight for the vast majority of players getting there during Mythic progression, outside of maybe the tippy top echelon of our rated community. How do you feel about that?
Yeah. First of all, there wasn't a big gap between, or it wasn't close in difficulty. Mugsy was way harder than Gallywix.
I was interested in that one too. I was like, huh.
But yeah, I mean, I think it was a pretty fun fight. I will say, I don't think it was a perfect fight to experience. Like, okay, I think if you were a ranged DPS player during phase 2, you were often just standing still for like 4 minutes doing nothing. Like, there are perspectives you could watch where it's literally 2 minutes of standing still, and like if you don't get targeted by some mechanics, you're just sitting there doing your target dummy rotation. Now that can be fun for a lot of players, but like I do think that that part in particular left a little bit wanting from an end boss on Mythic. Other than I think phase 1 was a lot of fun. It was a fun phase. The melee experience in phase 2 I think is also pretty good. I think that if the overall difficulty is maybe a little bit lower than where it should be, that's not the end of the world either, right? Like there are a lot of players who are just going to have fun with a boss that's maybe slightly easier than the average in that slot. Sarkroth was another good example of that.
Yeah, I have a couple of opinions on this. First and foremost, I actually think that you having a couple of players in your raid that aren't necessarily doing something is not necessarily a bad thing. We've kind of moved into the era of Mythic raiding where a lot of mechanics require all 20 players to interact with the mechanic, and it's random as to whether or not when you're picked or like what you're picked to or assigned to do. I think that, you know, in the past we had job doers, right? You would have people that you would assign to do a job, and Gallywix kind of pays homage to that, where you have 4 people who are holding these bombs, and their main job is do not die under any circumstances whatsoever. And I think it's totally reasonable that they're sitting there AFK for a little bit and making sure that they don't die. One thing I will say about Gallywix, though, is I think that it was numerically I don't think that mechanically it was lacking. I think numerically it was just lacking a little bit. I think if it had a tighter DPS check at the very end of the fight, and you would end up wiping to the DPS check a couple of times, and it just became a bit harder in that direction. I actually think it would have felt like a pretty worthy end boss. I don't think it was so far off end boss difficulty. I think that Ansarek, for example, was way further away from like an appropriate end boss than Gallywix was. I think that Ansarek was way far off in like the way too hard direction. Gallywix is just like one DPS check away from it being an excellent fight. I think that that's about the difficulty that I actually enjoy for bosses too. I don't think it need. Okay, well, I would actually prefer it to be a little bit harder, but it's closer than
I think
Ansarek
many more people will enjoy a Gallywix than an Ansarek. Yeah, I think that's very true.
Yeah.
And I do think that it's not like Gallywix is a perfect fight. It's a better fight than Ansarek, I think, for like if Blizzard had to choose between whether making Dimensius Gallywix or Ansarek, they should make a Gallywix, but it's definitely not perfect either.
Yeah, I think I agree with that.
But I think it's good to kind of hear their thoughts on it. Like, overall, they know they kind of missed Race World first, but it's not technically a failure for the majority of the population. So I think that's cool.
If something's bad for the race and good for everybody else, that's a good fight. Even though the race, like, obviously, they should care more about the race guild than any one random other guild, but it is still just a couple of guilds that are doing that, and there are thousands of cutting-edge guilds.
Even in the top, like, 300 world guilds and stuff like that, most cutting-edge guilds, I think, would tend to agree that Galley maybe landed a little bit on the easier end. I will say though that all the fights have ended up on the easier end after you start applying the turbo boost and you have the renown track. And I actually think that this is one of the things that I like about this raid is just how quick we've gotten into this feeling of being in deep farm. I think that that's fantastic too. And Gallywix, there's a lot of bosses that were really hard to re-kill, and this raid does not suffer from that, and Gallywix is not an offender.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's a really nice... like, regardless of how hard progression is, I think farm should be easier than it has been in the past few expansions, so...
Yeah,
this is nice
Gallywix is a great boss to farm.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Mugsy is the hard part. Like, you kill Mugsy, and then Galley is much freer, which, again, maybe a problem during progression, but it is kind of nice during farm.
Yeah.
All right. Well, the next question we asked was about different types of encounters. Ones that randomly assign things like Styx and Sprocket versus encounters that were pre-assigned assignments like Gallywix.
Hey, wait, that's what I just said.
Yeah, exactly. It was kind of weird. So Taylor answers, I think a great raid has a mix of both. A core part of raiding gameplay in World of Warcraft is the ability to continue tackling a challenge and through collaboration, planning, and strategy, improve at that challenge as a team. It's one of the few games where you can get together with 19 or up to 29 other friends and really come up with a strategy sitting around the boss looking at your raid ahead of time and feel like you can have the fruits of that labor. But that being said, we also want elements in the encounter that require a little bit of on-the-fly decision-making, things that can keep pulls feeling fresh from one pull to the next. The right balance there is really important. Some fights can be entirely pre-planned. Some fights are going to require a little bit more on your feet thinking, and I think that's a healthy balance for a raid. We're going to continue to embrace both types of difficulty and try to strike the right balance for what we love about the game and what we think players love. I mean, I think that's a fine answer.
Yep, no notes. That's exactly what I believe as well.
I think I think they've gone a little bit too far in the direction of like random assigned mechanic. Everybody has to participate, especially dude like Brute Twister, Ovanax, and mechanics.
Even like Mugsy cages, I think are
like Mugsy cages, Brute Twister, Ovanax, egg breaking. Like those are situations where a fire rack, like where you need to be positioned as well, feeling like it's fairly random. I wish that you could have something that's more controlled, or like pick where you're going on all of those fights, or pick where you're positioning. I don't know. I think we've moved away. I think the answer's great. 10 out of 10, no notes.
I think the only thing that like maybe some players don't enjoy, and I don't really know why this is stuff like Silken Court, where the entire fight is just completely scripted and is a 30-page raid plan. Do people actually enjoy that, or is that too far in one direction of like pre-planning? Like, how do you guys feel about that?
Yeah, the Silken, I agree, it was like a little too much raid planning, but you think about like Gallywix P1, right? And Gallywix P1, which canister you're soaking at every time is pre-planned. Who's doing the bombs and stuff is all pre-planned. All like that entire phase has very little RNG to it, and it's really fun.
Let me pose a question: would Sprocketmonger Mythic be a better or worse fight if you weren't like if you could hard assign who was soaking what mine? Would it be a better or worse fight?
Like which color you mean, or
like which mine? It wasn't based on what color you had.
Okay.
If you could just hard assign every single person to soak the mine, and it just gave you a debuff. The debuff would eventually wear off, and you could soak the next mine whenever a debuff is available. Would it be a better or worse fight? It's kind of interesting because that's what Silken Court would have essentially been, right? It's kind of an equivalent thing.
I think it's a better fight.
I think that fight would have been worse if they changed that part of it. Like, I think the figuring out how to play as red versus blue and how to get each mindset,
Did you not
as you could
experience
get
people
them.
just like messing it up during Prague because they hadn't seen that overlap yet? Oh, I just dropped the drills in the completely wrong spot because I had never been assigned that mine.
If our goal is to make it impossible to mess up during Prague, then I've got a difficulty for you, and it gives you 39 less eye level.
Well, no, I mean it's not like that, but is that a satisfying thing?
Yeah, I think it is. Like, it's satisfying to learn how to play around it, right? It's satisfying to be like, oh, I'm blue here. Here's how I move as blue in this spot, right?
Okay.
Like, oh, I'm red here, and I haven't been picked by a drill yet, and I haven't been picked by a mine yet. So, like, man, I'm gonna have a really tough next 20 seconds, and then eventually you figure it out, and on the kill, maybe somebody in your raid actually gets a nasty combo and stuff like that, and they figure it out, and that's like progression. That's
next one. Bandit
it would be a
icons
different
being random.
fight.
What about
It would be a
bandit
different fight
icons being random?
like which mob goes, which real assistant spawns in which spot.
Would it be better or worse if they were static as to what icon spawn where?
I think that would have been a better fight because it was such a hard fight that the difficulty of whether you had to do left versus right or one of the middle ones was like such a different amount of difficulty. If it was tuned to be a little bit less difficult like that, then maybe that, or maybe if the middle real assistant just always had more health or something like that. Like there are ways they could have done it that would have made that okay though. And I also think it's a slot machine boss. You have to have RNG on that fight. There are some things that are like you can't just be like, oh yeah, the way we're gonna fix this fight is by making it not random like that. You can do that on every fight except for the slot machine boss.
Totally fair.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we were talking about complexity with Mythic Plus, so we asked a complexity question about raid. Are there plans to do kind of a similar complexity decrease for the raid in Season 3? And Taylor answers, we've been listening, of course, to all the feedback that's come from Season 2. We're really glad that players are enjoying their time in Mythic Plus. The companion to that, of course, is Mythic Raiding, and there's probably some room to pull back a bit on difficulty in Season 3, but not all difficulty is really created the same. There's difficulty that can come from your ability to control your character, dodging lasers, picking up bombs, carry them from place to place. There's difficulty that can come from how much time and effort you've dedicated to your character and your gear. There's difficulty that can come from how good your strategy and your ability to collaborate with other players is. I think we may try to pull back slightly on the first of those, the twitchiness of gameplay. That, I think, is a place where we'd like to take raiding overall in the future, is a place that's a little bit more about strategy and your ability to play your character at a very high level. That doesn't mean the types of gameplay that we've all known and loved from even the time back in Naxxramas, like the Heigen dance, that's a classic WoW mechanic, and stuff like that isn't going anywhere. But I do think over the last couple expansions, we've probably treaded a bit too far into the dodge mechanic, and all of our difficulty, or the lion's share of our difficulty, is coming from that style of mechanic. So I don't think there's a major philosophical shift, but it's something we're keeping in mind as we're going into the Ghost of Koresh update.
Yeah, I think it's fair. You look at a fight like Tindril, 3-second seeds, and it's like this is genuinely an extremely difficult like Twitch reaction challenge that you're applying to your raid, and I think it's fair to say, okay, that's probably a little much. It does sound like this isn't a huge philosophy shift for them, but moving a little bit more in the direction of, gameplay that's more WoW and less, Twitch reaction, that seems good to me.
Oops. All right. Tettles, anything to say?
Nah, I mean, I tend to agree. I think that there's some level of complexity that's satisfying. And then there's some that just like feels unfun. And we've trended, I think, in the last couple of years to more situations of which the complexity ends up feeling a little bit less fun. And that's why I think that Blizzard is kind of, they're starting to taper it back a little bit. They kind of hit an arms race where Amir Jasil and Nearbar Palace were just like nuclear difficulty. And I think that going into Season 2, they were like, okay, wait, hold on. Everything that season was just way too hard. We can still have a fun season to play and it to be just less difficult.
I will say for me personally, I'm sad because I really do love doing the like nuclear difficulty. 3-second seeds, for instance, is something that I had a lot of fun trying to figure out how to do. And like when you actually succeed at that feels so good. So selfishly, I would love it if this philosophy change only applied after like the first month of the Mythic raid or something like that. But I get it. I think it's one of those cases where raiding is still going to be a lot of fun for me, even if there's less, nuclear difficulty twitch reaction mechanics.
Yeah, I mean, my thought process, I mean, whenever I started like raiding a little bit more hardcore, one of the things that I want to do is I wanted to kill bosses prior to them getting nerfed. And it's like, if you want to do that, you can, there's always better guilds that you can join to be able to kill the bosses earlier on in the season, right? Like you can.
Well, yeah, but they're talking about like not making the mechanics as hard as the pre-nerf versions that I enjoyed doing them, not because it was pre-nerf, but because I loved the absurd difficulty of something like 3-second seeds.
That's fair. I mean, I just kind of view that as similar as like the absurd difficulty kind of conversation.
And look, if that's the casualty of this, it's worth it, right?
If you're killing the boss earlier, it's always going to be much harder, right? Especially if you're killing it down. And that's why the race roll first is cool, because they're killing the boss down like 15 item levels.
Yeah.
All right. Well, you mentioned Mugsy jails earlier, and also stick scrapmasters, and this was kind of identified as not giving players enough time. That they had to use an add-on to do it. So with the add-on changes coming up, we asked, what is your goal with raid fight difficulty in 11.2, but before the add-on changes take effect? Because we thought that was really interesting. So Taylor answered, we often call this concept affordance. When a mechanic goes out, we want to make sure that players have not only the right amount of time, but the right amount of visual and audio feedback in order to respond to a mechanic. There are probably a couple places in 11.1 where we could have given more affordance for players to respond, because as you mentioned in your question, where players don't feel like they have apt ability to respond to that and the right affordance, they'll often go towards other solutions like renting weak auras or using add-ons for that type of response. So it's something that's very top of the mind for us, especially coming off the back of a couple of very twitchy fights in Liberation of Undermine. So we're examining all those areas and Ghost of Koresh and making sure that for Mana Forge Omega, which is the raid that we coming out with the update, that we pay very close attention to areas of affordance that we may need to pull back on.
I mean, I think that this is not surprising. I mean, Ian, I think Dratnos had an interview with Ian a few weeks or maybe even a couple months ago, talking about whenever they were talking about the add-ons specifically and talking about maybe like a disarming of add-ons and weak auras and stuff like that and how that would end up looking. It's kind of this situation where I think that it starts with the mechanics. And whenever you give more time to abilities, right, like the tendril seeds that you talked about earlier, if that tendril seed, it instead of being 3 seconds, it started out and it was like 8 seconds or 9 seconds, it's a much different mechanic. Same thing with the Brood Twister Ovanax eggs. If those, instead of being 8 seconds, they started out and they were 15 seconds. That allows you to be able to do something that's a little bit on the fly and it's never going to require an add-on. I guess, in theory, nothing actually requires an add-on, but players aren't going to be the first thing they're not going to do is going to be like, all right, we need an add-on for this. They're going to try to do it just with their hands first and being able to like use their eyes and make sure that because it's annoying when you have to run all the way across the room, you're missing casts and stuff like that. If you instead could like look at somebody else, be like, okay, that he's already standing next to, I'm going to go move to that one across the room. It's a lot more fun to play that way as well. I think is also a key piece of this.
100%. Yeah, I would love to see them. I'd love to see them design a raid that didn't require weak auras before they killed weak auras. I would like to see that. I think that they're likely to do it in the other order, but I think that would be a really good way to do it.
I think Galax is a perfect example of that shows this isn't a chicken and eggs, a chicken and egg thing. This is, if Blizzard can just nerf the fights, then players will still have fun, and they'll just choose not to use add-ons because it's a waste of their time to code the damn thing. So,
well, I mean, there's some mechanics that they could have put on Gallywix that would have required you to have add-ons. Like if they made the canisters, the TikTok canisters, have like a marker over their head, and you as a player had a marker over your head, and you had to get in the specific TikTok canister or something like that.
Yeah, if there was anything that randomly made it so different people weren't there, that couldn't do like that as well. The same soaks every time, you would have a weak aura or something that assigned it instead.
They were running out to do a different mechanic, and you're like, and it was like 4 or 5 different people that had to run out and do a different mechanic at the same time. Yeah.
All right. We mentioned Tazavesh. Do you remember the Hillbrand fight?
That's the guy with the weak aura boss.
The 4 runes, right?
The 4 runes weak aura boss, yes. So we had to ask about this and the type of mechanic. So we haven't really explored the communication or information asymmetry mechanics that are relatively present in other encounters, such as Mechatork or Hillbrand. These mechanics technically wouldn't need add-ons, so we asked, are there plans to use these types or explore these types of mechanics again? And Taylor answered, the short answer is absolutely. I think in the future, as Ian spoke about, as we move away from add-ons that can help with in-combat computational problem solving, it opens up a big space for us to do that. This is again calling back to classic raids. We've had these types of problems in WoW for a very long time, back to the days of Prophet Scarab and AQ40, and that's a really cool problem space that in part we haven't been able to explore for a while because of the effect of computational add-ons in combat. I, for one, am looking forward to the day when we can get back to a little more of these, and there's probably more we can do in the meantime as well, so we're going to keep looking for opportunities to make those types of unique mechanics with each raid tier. Drew chimes in and wants to add a little here. He says, I think another good call out here specifically is that these feel like raid mechanics where you're going to spend a couple of pulls with your friends, and we kind of want you in there communicating. It's probably something we would do less in a dungeon. I'll set an example actually with Tazavesh coming back. We're actually moving the code breaker boss Hilbrand. This is an example of the kind of mechanic you're talking about, and that's moving to the hard mode version of the mechanic where we expect you to be in a coordinated group, and the Mythic Plus experience with pugs might not have something like that and will alter the mechanic. We asked, does it just show the code the entire time? And your answer is yeah. In that setting, and when we want a coordinated group, where you're with a trusted group of friends, you're kind of signing up for maybe multiple attempts at a boss. That's a more appropriate space for this kind of mechanic. So we're open to doing more of this, but that doesn't mean we're going to do it everywhere.
Yeah.
I think this makes a lot of sense. The same reason like the Mechagon hard mode mechanic isn't in M+. Although, I do always kind of feel bad because I like doing those hard mode mechanics. I wish maybe there's something where like, hey, once we get past 12s or something, these coordination mechanics can come back in. Because like those high keys, you're also supposed to be doing them, right? Like I don't know. I feel like there's room to mess around there.
Do not let him cook. I think that they're moving this in the right direction. But
okay, like the specific code breaking mechanic is on Hilbrand, for instance, I think is less good than the King Mechagon one was.
Here's the thing: there's some level of gameplay that Blizzard kind of expects you to be in voice for, or
right.
There's some certain levels of dungeons that they kind of expect you to be in voice for. Mythic Raid, they expect you to kind of be in voice, right? And that's why the information asymmetry tends to be reserved for Mythic only mechanics. And then for Hilbrand, I think that makes sense. That fight was stupid, and then people ended up starting to type in chat the order that the markers were in, and that was just nonsense. And then people had add-ons, and then somebody would click the wrong color on the add-on, and then you'd do the wrong rune. It was like really silly.
Yeah, and moving it to hard modes, making it so that that's something that'll exist in the hard mode dungeons. Like, if hard mode is received well as a complement to M+, I could see us moving to a world where it's not just these 3 mega dungeons have a hard mode version. Like that could be, they could do much more of that and have those mechanics in a lot of them. That could be really fun.
I do think there's appetite. I mean, for hard mode, I think, or like timerless dungeons. I think there's an appetite for timerless dungeons for a decent amount of people. Obviously, it's not everybody, but I do think that there's some people that would have interacted with Mythic Plus, but they didn't want the pressure of the timer, and so they were like, maybe not.
Yeah, so I think it's definitely positive here.
All right. We had 2 more questions here for you to kind of look at and give your thoughts on. So the first one, about the future of rating, I asked, do you feel like the future of rating relies more on throughput checks like War Armband or mechanical checks like Gallywix? So Taylor says, so we touched on this a bit earlier. Maybe I'm taking the easy way out here, but the short answer is both. Improving your character, gaining better loot, coming back the next week, having put in the effort throughout the game is going to be a core part of WoW for a very long time. That's really the core and heart of what we love about a season of World of Warcraft. Mechanical checks will be something in WoW for a very long time. So I think dividing it into that area that we talked about earlier of dodgy agility type mechanics and also strategic mechanics that you can plan ahead for a little bit and tackle as a team, we're planning to lean a little bit more towards the latter and less towards the former going forwards. So that's probably how I would divide that and talk about our future plans for how we're planning to tackle difficulty in raids. That being said, this isn't a binary thing. A really good encounter and at large, a really good raid has all different types of difficulty. Where we're blessed to have all kinds of different raid encounters in every raid, and we want to make sure that we scratch every itch, that we offer all kinds of different difficulty for players who might enjoy different types of raid encounters.
Do you guys think they've struggled to actually tune bosses' damage checks appropriately recently?
Yeah, it's a hard challenge to solve. I think if you look at Liberation of Undermine, it's definitely true that like the damage checks on Bandit, Styx, Sprocket were super hard, and then the damage check on Gallywix was non-existent, and that is
Nerebar.
Nerebar Palace as well. You have Kai Beza that just nuclear difficulty damage check comes out. Although Nerebar Palace, they were all pretty much hard, all the damage checks except for I guess the first 4 bosses.
I think so as well. For a while, we actually had no damage checks, right? Like, wasn't the Shadowlands era like no enrage timer for a lot of it? Yeah,
or not relevant in rage timers. That was a large part of the problem with Sanctum was that you would just wait to push on all these bosses
Oh
because
god.
you just were waiting for your cooldowns to come back up. And
Sylve's
Yeah.
only real damage check was the last phase, like blowing up the
Yeah.
last platform or whatever.
yeah, exactly.
Okay, yeah, like it's weird because back then, because of the lack of damage check, you would just overheal everything. Right? Like you just bring more healers. But now that we have a damage check, and because sometimes it's just way overtuned, you're dropping healers.
I think it's good for there to be a damage check that exists. I think that's fun. I think it's fun to try and actually have and to have your damage matter and to have it feel really good and important to have some pumpers in your raid team.
Yeah.
I feel like over-indexing into damage checks is probably the correct approach. I mean, ultimately, I agree with what Taylor said there, where it does require both. I think that having strategic elements to World of Warcraft fights are what differentiates them from patchwork fights, right? Like you're not going back to class. We're not fighting patchwork anymore. And so having the strategic elements to them matter. But I do think that everybody's just so good at this game. I think that damage checks matter more than they have necessarily in the past. And on top of that as well, you are getting progressively more gear as time goes on. And if they're going to continue to keep the renown system where you're getting progressive damage increases over time, those are kind of things that help just allow you to kind of get over that hump damage check wise. And that's why I'm kind of saying I think that like they should over index into damage checks being a core part of most fights, knowing that there's going to be some reprieve. Now I'm not saying that they should overtune bosses. That's not the point. But I think that like if they made the damage checks a lot more real on most of these fights, with the knowledge that eventually you're going to be able to gain enough power over time that even cutting edge guilds will just have it 18% more damage and be able to blow that fight out of the water. I think that's a nice way of looking at it. And we have turbo boost and stuff like that as well this season. We don't know the future of turbo boost, but if it returned, that also helps with that kind of thing.
I think people do react pretty negatively if there's an overtuned DPS check that they run into in the early weeks, though. Like Liberation of Undermine, you running into Styx and Bandit and Sprocket and Muggsy, early on when that damage check is
I think you forgot
overtuned.
something there. Rick week
Reverb.
1.
Rick Reverb, Rick Reverb,
Yeah.
the Rick Reverb week 1 damage check or week 2 damage check or week 3 damage check, depending on your guild, right? Like those, that damage check was extremely real, and I think not a particularly satisfying thing to wipe to that early in the raid.
Yeah. I know a lot of guilds this tier, they did mythic splits of 2 bosses rather than attempting pulls on Rick Reverb just because it wasn't worth the time. They didn't have a realistic shot at it, which is just like, I don't know about that one.
Well, okay, so is that tuning or is that design? Because I don't think that necessarily, like, design-wise, like, imagine if Rick Reverb launches and has, let's say 5% less HP. And it's still a real damage check, right? You're not going to be able to, like, have deaths and stuff like that. And the damage check is the bigger piece of, like, what that fight realistically is. I don't think every fight's, like, good to be made hard either. I just kind of structurally think that not every fight should be, like, That's why Styx Bunk Junker is just, like, whenever it was made hard, it wasn't like that satisfying.
Yeah.
I don't know, but like again, I think that there's kind of a tuning element that's important there. And tuning this game is just frankly very difficult, as we've seen time and time again. Blizzard struggles all the time to be able to tune it perfectly, and I don't know if they're ever going to tune it perfectly, frankly.
Yeah, I do like fights where your damage matters. I think that's definitely It's not particularly satisfying whenever there's a fight where you're like, hey, just live. Your damage doesn't actually matter. We're gonna beat the check if you all live. Like those fights are less fun than the ones where your damage matters the whole way through.
It's like Goldilocks. It's like,
Yeah.
I don't want it to be too hard, but I also don't want it to be too easy. But if it's just right, then it's the greatest thing ever.
They should tune the game perfectly. That's our expert opinion.
Yeah.
It's crazy that like Sludge Fist was like that. Everybody always points back to Sludge Fist, how everybody hits the wall and you kill it.
Yeah.
And it's just like, that is incredible that one fight was so like well tuned that everybody got to the enrage and had that moment.
Wiping to the enrage somewhere between like 3 and let's say 15 times is normally pretty satisfying, especially if you can see the light at the end of the tunnel and know that the boss is killable. But if you've experienced something like Rick Reverb where you're looking at the numbers and you're like, this is not happening and we're going to do mythic splits, that's like, okay, that's where it becomes a problem. But whenever, again, like I said earlier, if it's like 3 or 5% less HP, could be insane. Never know.
Yeah. There were problems with Rick Reverb, which I think just summed up to the barrels, I'm pretty sure. The barrel spawns.
Yeah,
barrel spawn RNG.
Barrel spawn RNG.
That boss is not a slot machine. They're not allowed to have stupid RNG on it.
Rick Reverb!
Yeah.
Time to get...
Do you know those barrels just still don't give you the stacks on them, like, at all?
Yeah, randomly. It's
Wait,
yeah.
they don't?
That boss also super buggy in terms of like
The
if you get
MC?
MC'd
Yeah.
during the intermission, do you get killed or broken out when you get hit down? It's
The
like
MC
90% of the
results.
time you get killed, but you could just proc at getting broken out instead.
Yep. All right. The last question that we have here. Any plans to change the way the Mythic Raid lockout works? No.
Oh, please.
No.
Oh, no.
No plans to announce right now. Would love to hear feedback on how players think the Mythic Raid lockout is working for them, but messing with the Mythic Raid lockout, it's a delicate thing. Communities really formed the heart of World of Warcraft. Mething was something as core as how people schedule their weeks or schedule the social groups. That's something we want to do very deliberately with a very clear goal in mind and take a lot of care in how we approach that problem. So, no changes for 11.2.
Yeah, I think they heard the question of like, are you planning to do fundamental? Because to me, the big thing to change about the Mythic lockout is just the fact that it behaves differently than the heroic lockout, rather than doing something like making it uncapped per week or reset at a time other than Tuesday or any weird stuff like that. There are definitely reasons why they have to be careful with doing that, but it's something where right now it does suck that if you're trying to pug some Mythic or even have a mostly guild run and pug a few slots, it's like such a huge barrier to entry is the fact that somebody's just going to get saved, even if they just walk in without even killing a boss, if you've already killed Vexy, right, or Cauldron.
Yep.
There's a large amount of Mythic. Okay, so I mean, obviously we're all in Hall of Fame Mythic guilds, but there's a large amount of Mythic guilds that are like below us that are just randomly progressing whatever bosses. They don't have a bench. I think is like the big differentiator, right? Where Hall of Fame Mythic guilds, they end up having a bench. They have people that can come in if somebody's out. If say a couple guys on your raid team can't show up that raid day, realistically you can't get somebody to come in and fill for them because they're either locked to a different guild's prog, which happens, or alternatively nobody in LFG wants to lock themselves to doing random prog on sticks bunk junker with somebody's guild. But like if you didn't necessarily tie them to that, there is a chance that you could get somebody to come in and kind of help you out, whether or not it be a friend or it be somebody via LFG.
Yeah, now the one thing that you want to avoid is you want to avoid just changing it, because if you made it like the heroic lockout right now, then everybody would want to do splits of Mythic Vexy and Mythic Cauldron.
Nonsense.
Which would be nonsense. So it is like you can't just change it and expect that to be pure upside. But you could do something like changing it midway through the season once the point has passed where people would splits matter or anything like that.
Third week or something like that, right? Like whenever the Mythic BOEs unlock or something.
Right, something so that could be a good time to do it because you're already changing the loot rules then.
All right. Well, that is basically the majority of the questions. We asked a few more. They will be released with the rest of the interview questions that we just had on Wowhead, so make sure to check out the full interview. But yeah, that is basically what we know about 11.2 for the most part. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I'm hyped.
The dungeon pool is really good. That is like an S tier dungeon pool in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm always excited about. I'm really excited to see Tazvesh again. I think Streets and Gambit are probably two of my top 5 M+ dungeons of all time.
Nice. Yeah, I'm really hyped for it as well. Excited for Mythic Plus. Excited to see what the raid has. Like, they seem to be hyping up this raid a lot. They are hyping up the Dimensius encounter a lot. We asked them what the thing they were most excited for, and they both answered Dimensius.
That's the last boss of the
the last boss of the raid.
I mean, dude, they got a lot of work cut out for them. I'm in love with you guys. I think that having to design an encounter that traverses a large area like that, every single time we've seen it so far, it's been kind of underwhelming.
Tindral was sick.
Yeah, Tindral was good.
But okay, maybe Tendril was good, but then the rest of them that I've seen, that the ones that I would think of are, Sylvanas. We have the Sylvanas platforms where you're running across these platforms. Carapace and Azoth, again, not as cool. I think they have their work cut out for them, but ultimately, Blizzard has a tendency to overperform whenever people kind of doubt them and question what they're doing sometimes.
I mean, the only way I see it is if there's like a phase like Sylvanas where you're crossing bridges, like going this, like traveling a long intermission phase. Or we bring back dragon riding, or like some kind of like maybe we're driving.
No. Do not do that. Look, driving is kind of fun, but it is way clunkier and less fun than dragon riding.
I'm kind of expecting it to be like this. You're walking you saw there was like that screenshot that you posted or you had that showed up that was like, it looked like it was a purple city. I kind of expect that you're gonna be like battling through the city because Dratnos said it was like horrific vision-esque.
That was a meme.
It looks kind of like it, right?
Yeah, this one.
Yeah, I mean, if you're walking over something the size of Stormwind, that would be a large. That would be a lot for an encounter.
Yeah,
So
you would have to be walking pretty
Yeah.
much the entire time, I'm pretty sure, to go that
Well,
far
I mean,
in.
Ansarek was a relatively large like a play zone. Where
yeah,
you'd end
but
up,
compared to
getting bounced in
Stormwind,
platforms.
that's like, a
That's
district.
1/4,
of
yeah.
Stormwind. Yeah.
Well, yeah, sure. Okay, well, I guess I probably have the dragon right now that you guys say that, or what is it called? Dynamic flying?
Yeah, or
Skywriting.
there could just be portals throughout it or something like that, to different areas in the place.
Does that count?
It depends. All right. Anything
right.
else, Squishy?
No, that is it. Thank you both for coming on and giving your thoughts on all the 11.2 stuff. Make sure to check out Wowhead for everything that's coming out, and especially whenever the PTR goes live so we can start data mining some cool stuff. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
GG's.